It wasn't that he exactly lied. It was that in many cases, he shares just enough of the truth to put a lie into the mind of a person who's listening to him.
When the abuse took place, he was her senior pastor, and it was escalating. It was, went from personal emails to intimate emails to erotic emails. Mike pressuring this woman, Kim, into not sleeping with her own husband, which shows a desire for possession. You're mine. You don't belong to him. You belong to me.
That is a direct assault upon the marriage.
Yes. That's when Ray got a hold of me and he said, I have to defend my wife. One woman, Sarah Monk, she worked for him. She was a grad. She was like a family member and she loved Mike like a father, but then he took it to what I would call a darker. People saw that they were closer than a 46-year-old man of God should be with a 20-year-old student. She came there to be a disciple. She came there to be on fire for God. She left in September of 2002 broken. The only reason we're talking about this 23 years later is because of the cover-up.
She was, for some reason, rummaging through some of our drawers and found the note I'd written.
That is not what happened.
It's high-level manipulation and lies.
His response to me was, quote, I did hear some crazy reports about 6 weeks ago with some wildly false charges. So right out of the gate, he is lying to me.
Oh, it was more than you said? Oh,
Yeah.
It was bigger than you said? Oh, it was worse than you said? Over and over again, even 23 years down the road. To cover up, what you have to do is you have to victimize victims more. That's the nature of cover up. It always does that.
In order to cover it up, you have to continue to hurt people, to deceive people. And it becomes this web that you cannot get untangled.
This video is going to give evidence and examples of Dr. Michael Brown, who I love and appreciate, and who I've promoted over the years. Evidence and examples of him participating in cover-up, manipulation, and outright lies that continue to harm innocent people and avoid accountability for his past sins. This didn't need to happen. It's not just the past sin issues, it's the ongoing cover-up that needs to be dealt with. I need to say several things before we get into the evidence, and you'll be getting a lot of evidence today on screen and in your ears. Number one, you may have heard bad stuff about me, Mike Winger. I have a spirit of accusation, or I am the accuser of the brethren, or fill in the blank, Leviathan. You can think that, but please at least look at the evidence of many witnesses, because that is the biblical standard. 1 Timothy 5:19 and 20 tells us not to receive an accusation against an elder unless it's brought by 2 or 3 witnesses. But the ones who are persisting in sin, you have to expose them in the presence of all. And there's a complete breakdown in this last part of the application of 1 Timothy 5. The frequent thing that goes on in cover-up culture is you simply don't receive accusations against leaders, period, end of story. But when many witnesses come forward, when evidence, or even one witness with corroborating evidence, that's multiple witnesses, comes forward, it's on the leadership in the local community, or if a person has a large online ministry, it's on the leadership in the online world and their board. If they neglect their role, which Michael Brown's board has been neglecting, his current board is neglecting his role, it's on our necks to follow 1 Timothy 5:20 and say, okay, we have to let this rebuke be as big as the ministry. And so this video. Number 2, I love and appreciate Dr. Michael Brown. Still, his series answering Jewish objections to Jesus and all the messianic apologetic stuff he's done is incredible. It is wonderful. It will continue to bear fruit on into the future, and that's a wonderful thing, and I'm happy for that. It's still something I consider very important for us to have. His cultural stands for topics that make other people shake in their boots, his boldness in those things has been inspiring, and it has been solidly biblical and committed to Jesus Christ. He himself is inspiring. I used to listen to his podcast all the time, and I still would just feel uplifted when I hear him speak. But there's another side to Dr. Michael Brown, and people can be complicated and they can have multiple sides to themselves. And unfortunately, this is that other side. Now, some of you, number 3, some of you may want to think, Mike, why aren't you doing Matthew 18? Well, again, I will say this is a 1 Timothy 5:19 and 20 issue, not a Matthew 18 issue. This is not about personal offenses against me. This is about dealing openly with an open problem that's persistent in a leader with many witnesses. But Matthew 18 in the Culture of Coverup always stops at step 2, right? Step 1, you go to him alone. Step 2, you go to him with a leader or with another brother. And then step 3, you tell it to the church. That step 3 never happens with those who constantly quote Matthew 18 with no knowledge of the actual events. So I'm just saying, before you quote Matthew 18, go read it again. We're in step 3. Step 2 has happened. Step 1 has happened. It's step 3 now. And 4, cover-up culture is worse than you think. It is going on. I've been interviewing witnesses for months, talking to people behind the scenes, a number of big ministries, especially in the charismatic world. It's not exclusively, but especially in the hyper-charismatic side of things. Cover-up culture is rampant, and it's worse than you think it is. And dealing with examples of it, like this one, even though this is not the worst example, but dealing with these examples will help to stop it. I think the next generation of leaders is going to see this video and they will be inspired to make sure this kind of thing can't happen again. All right, let's talk about how we got here. Between 2001 and 2002, Michael Brown had inappropriate relationships with 2 women. One of them, Sarah, was an assistant. She was 19 when this first started happening, and he was in his 40s. And this, we'll go over the details. They did not sleep together. It wasn't like that, but it was inappropriate, it was wrong, and you'll get a bunch of specific examples. The second one was a lady named Kim, at least we're calling her Kim. She's a married woman who was under his spiritual leadership, who he had an erotic relationship with, not exactly an affair, erotic correspondence with. And at least that's what I would call it. That's my understanding of the terminology that I think is appropriate. You'll get tons of evidence, tons of details, and then the abuse and the cover-up. And it's bad stuff. Now, what happened between these 2 women and Brown and the people around them at the time could have been recovered from 23 years ago, but it was never properly dealt with. Essential details remained hidden even from his board and from those who came to talk to him, and he began doing damage control 23 years ago, and it's been ongoing ever since. I believe that since these things first happened, Dr. Brown is engaged in a 23-year-long attempt to cover up what happened, adding further injury to those who he previously already hurt, and adding more people to that list. And he has manipulated or deceived those who came to confront him or ask for accountability or try to find out what really happened. He did not want this stuff to come out, and he still doesn't, and he's still doing it, and he's only doing it more than ever before on a larger stage with more accomplices, and it's not okay. Recently, his past actions have come to light because last year a Roy's Report article went out where multiple witnesses came forward, and then they started showing up and their data started showing up elsewhere as well. When I first got involved in it being a public thing, I was told that they were going to do a third-party investigation. Dr. Brown said that he was going to submit to it. Do it and submit to it. Hire a third party, follow their instructions and their conclusions. Unfortunately, it looking good for Dr. Brown's ministry and for him didn't last that long, because when the report came out, Firefly, the investigative team who did the report, their report was rejected, at least significantly rejected. I'll highlight just 2 elements of those things that the board rejected from the Firefly report, which they said they would submit to. The first was the use of the terminology sexually abusive misconduct, and you can see on your screen. This was a terminology that they applied to Dr. Brown's relationship with Sarah, the teenage girl who was 19 and then 20, throughout the course of their interactions that were inappropriate. And they rejected that. The elder accountability team says, no, we don't want to use that terminology. We reject that. We're going to call it leadership misconduct, which a lot of people, including those who were close to the situation, thought was misleading and going back on their word. The other thing that they rejected, the second thing, is and this is a big deal, the consistent pattern of oppression, of misleading and deception that Dr. Brown was found to be part of. I'll read to you now from the Firefly report. It is believed that over the past 25 years, Brown has deliberately deflected questions about allegations of sexual misconduct. This pattern of deflection appears to be a calculated effort to evade accountability, suppress the allegations, and protect his ministry's reputation. By maintaining silence and avoiding direct answers, Brown has seemingly sought to shield himself from scrutiny, potentially enabling these stories to remain hidden and preserving his position within the ministry. This is part of what came out of the actual investigation itself. But Dr. Brown's elder accountability team, his guys, right? His guys, they get the report from Firefly, they reject this as well, and they say instead the following. It appears clear to the elder accountability team, those are Dr. Brown's guys, that throughout this process, dating back 23 years, Dr. Brown has been repeatedly questioned about these two situations and has answered his interrogators consistently with honesty and remorse. That is not what the Firefly report concluded, and it is not the evidence that the Firefly report gave, and I'm going to demonstrate that in today's video as well. If they would have simply submitted to Firefly's report, I would not be making this video. If at any point in the future Dr. Brown comes out and openly deals with the issues, honestly, I'll be happy to delete this video. I'd much rather it not be here. It is also not monetized. I'm not making anything out of doing this. So there was the rejection of the investigation that they said they would submit to. There was the fact that they were pushing against tons of evidence, and there's an ongoing pattern of manipulation. I will demonstrate several lies from Dr. Brown, many lies from Dr. Brown in this video. I'm sorry to do this. It hurts you. Many of you out there hurts you. It hurts me too, not to make myself like, woe is me. I'm just saying, I feel the same way. But then it got worse. Dr. Brown went on to the Mercy Culture podcast. Mercy Culture, this is Landon and Heather Schott, their ministry, their church. They have a podcast, and they seem to be grabbing a number of people this year who've been exposed as seriously problematic individuals and promoting them. And here, now we can add to that this podcast they did with Dr. Brown. So they bring Dr. Brown onto their podcast, and it was really bad. Gaslighting, manipulation, half-truths, a lot of half-truths, lies, spiritual abuse, just the worst example of cover-up culture I think I've ever seen, if I'm to be honest with you guys. And I hate to keep adding more information at the beginning of this video, but there's going to be a lot, and there will be timestamps down below. You can bounce around to the specific 10 lies. I think it's 10 that we ended up with, and you can do that. But one of the reasons why I'm doing this video is because Dr. Brown met with me personally, Mike Winger, at ETS, that's the Evangelical Theological Seminary conference that I sometimes do go to when I can. And he asked for some time aside, just the two of us. And I granted it because I love the guy. And I was like, yes, I was excited to go sit with him for a while. He shared his defense, and he told me this stuff before other people found out. He told me stuff, but it was his version of events. And I believed him. I had a couple reservations, but I basically believed him. I found out later he was misleading me. I believe he was trying to use me to help him produce Coverup, to keep things from being exposed and to get me on his team. I think that's what he was doing. And of course, he doesn't believe that and argues against that. But I have multiple examples of half-truths and outright lies that he told me during this time, and I'll share some of them in this video. Thinking that I was somehow brought into this scenario by Dr. Brown, that I've promoted him so much in the past, and that I am currently on a series of videos that I believe God would have me do to try to expose abuse and deception and fraud that is going on in the church. This is not my forever ministry thing, but for a season, I'm going to do this, even though I do not like it. I thought I needed to do this video on Dr. Brown for that and other reasons we're about to explain to you. But joining me today is going to be Ron Cantor. Ron Cantor, even though he is going to definitely be demonized by those who are very solidly in the Dr. Brown as being falsely accused camp, Ron has, from what I've seen, consistently been proven true and honest and just right over and over and over again. When I fact check, when I go back, when I look at the private conversations I've had with Dr. Brown, and I look and I see this and I confirm with other witnesses over and over again, he's been proven true, whereas Dr. Brown is proven false. So I've invited him on today because he's like the foremost representative of the eyewitnesses on this topic, and he knows the situation like the back of his hand. I still love and appreciate Dr. Michael Brown. I think highly of his gifts, and I treasure his contributions to Jewish apologetics and cultural holiness. But there is, I believe, another side to him that is running unchecked, that it comes out especially when the threat of the truth coming out is present. It's a side that participates in cover-up culture and refuses biblical accountability while feigning holiness. And I think that Dr. Brown behind the scenes has been part of the reason why cover-up culture continues to exist. He's not the sole reason, he's not the core of it, but part of the reason, his behavior, is why cover-up culture is running rampant in the charismatic world. This video is dedicated to those who've had no voice and have been gaslit, manipulated, lied to, or lied about by Dr. Michael Brown. And if he repents in the future, this video is dedicated to that future Dr. Michael Brown. Yes, I have already confronted him, as have many others. This is the final step where we tell it to the church. So let me play my interview with Dr. Ron Cantor on 10 lies from Dr. Michael Brown. Ron, I'm grateful for you meeting with me and doing this video. I know this is unpleasant for both of us. Neither of us really wants to do this. And when I first reached out, you actually weren't going to do it. That was your initial response, was that you were kind of done with this, but you've changed your mind. I just want you to explain, to set the stage. Here's our disclaimers. They're very important that we share this stuff. Why didn't you want to make this video?
Well, you and I think started talking in March, April, and we talked about doing something together. And then I had made a commitment that I wasn't going to do any videos about this subject until after the Firefly investigation. And then I did one with Wake Up and Win, with Minor Prophets, Julie Roy's, a few others I can't remember. And I began to see very quickly, I'm telling the whole story, and it's an uncomfortable story to tell. It's about somebody who's very dear to me. To this day, I pray for him every single day, and for his wife as well. So it is, I just felt uncomfortable telling the whole story over and over again. And so in early May, I had decided, all right, I think I'm done with, I felt in my soul that this is done. This chapter's over. I'm moving on with my life. And that's when the Heather Schott video came out, interview, 3.5 hours.
I got to tell, just for people to know this, I got to say that this was the one big response video that Dr. Michael Brown did to all these things. And it was, in all honesty, I believe it was egregious. It was so bad. It was like every tool in the book for gaslighting, misleading, and victim blaming and all this stuff. And it's not that nothing in it was true, but there was so much in it that was misleading.
But today we will be uncovering the big lies told as we share Dr. Brown's story. Dr. Michael Brown said to me, he said, Heather and Landon, go and ask the Lord if I am lying. Go and ask him if I'm not trustworthy, and whatever you hear from the Lord and decide, I will be okay with, because he knows that we seek God and his voice in everything. We hear his voice, we know his voice, we obey his voice. We did, and Dr. Michael Brown, we stand with you. And I also believe that this is unseating demonic principalities and attacks against the body of Christ to divide, when I believe we are in a pivotal hour to prepare the body of Christ for the return of Jesus.
So there was a plot. In other words, it wasn't just someone with a grievance, because they just could have come to me. Our door's always been open and fully accessible. There was an actual plot. People began, and it was the same thing. I got an anonymous call, I can't tell you from who, saying this happened. So spreading all these lies and rumors. But that's when it started, September of last year.
Many of these people that are making these statements have affairs in the last 5 and 10 years.
How about
have
porn
done
accounts?
horrific things.
How about pornography accounts? Asking for someone to be physically raped and abused to their amusement.
Right.
What you're sharing right now, if you are a Christian, to act like you don't understand this at all,
well, even beyond,
is ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. It's insincere.
Yeah, no, it's
I don't believe you,
frankly.
I don't believe you when you say that this is offensive to you. I think that moral purity right now is the spirit of the mob. It's popular. So when you get on the internet and say, I'm going to make this video and I know it's not going to be popular, when you know precisely that it is popular, and that's the reason you're making the video, is because it's going to get the likes, the comments, and the shares, and the follows, and you can monetize it.
Right.
So I just want to look in the camera and say, I don't believe you.
Who are they restoring? Oh, no, they're not restoring anybody. They're just here to tear down, using and abusing the name of Jesus Christ to build their own following. It's literal idolatry. They deified themselves.
That it stirred this stuff back up even for me, because I was just waiting for the dust to settle to figure out what really happened here. And then my plate's really full with other stuff. The last thing I wanted to do was a video on Michael Brown, who I've always really respected and appreciated. But yeah, so you saw that, and that changed things for me.
For all the reasons that you just so eloquently stated, that there had to be a response. Number one, they took 2 clips of me. It's comical, but they took 2 clips of me and played them completely out of context, which showed me that there was some real dishonesty there. If they had just showed it in the full context, I would have been thrilled. And I had to respond to that because it reflected on Sarah. They were saying that Sarah was brainwashed, that she was fine until others got to her, which is simply not true. And we'll get into that. So I just felt like, okay, I thought I was done, but I guess I'm not. In fact, a friend of mine, a mutual friend called a mutual friend, and said, how much longer is Ron going to make these videos? And I told my friend, you tell him that I'm done. I don't want to make these videos. I was done a month ago. It's if as long as these lies continue, I will continue to confront them. I feel a responsibility, particularly for people that I now know as friends, that if you're going to lie about them, I'm going to confront that lie. But Mike had been quiet, since that time. I don't know if that message was delivered to him and he made a calculation that it's better just to be quiet about this. And I hope so, because it is better at this point. But then last week, the day after we talked, and I told you that I really wasn't comfortable, he posted I noticed it the day afterwards. He posted a teaching that he did where he talked about being contrite, how the Lord revives the contrite. He used himself as an example of somebody, I assume, who is now contrite after going through a deep trial. So he referred to the past 7-8 months as a trial, not the consequences of bad behavior, but a difficult trial that he went, the worst trial of his life. And it was misleading. It was gaslighting anybody who would listen, as opposed to saying, you know what? I was credibly accused of sexually abusive misconduct with with a 20-year-old staffer when I was 46. And there was another situation where I found myself in a verbal erotic relationship with someone that I knew, a married woman. And because of that, I've gone through a really difficult time these past 7 months. That would have been honest. So that is spin, and it's gaslighting, and it's wrong. So I talked to you the next morning, and I said, okay, I guess we should, let's do it. For me, I hope this is the final word, regarding Dr. Michael Brown and me commenting on it.
Yeah. And for my own sake, I think that this is important because I want to show that there's a real cover-up culture going on. And it's not that it only exists inside charismatic circles, because that's certainly not true, but it exists very strongly inside charismatic circles for some reason. And the best way, I think, to show people and then help change it is to just give some examples. Here you go. Here's one high-profile examples of cover-up culture. And so there's two different issues with Dr. Brown. There's one, the issue of what happened many, many years ago that could have, at this stage, easily been resolved and recovered from and move on. And then there's the ongoing cover-up. That to cover up, what you have to do is you have to victimize victims more. That's the nature of cover-up. It always does that. And so there's that continued ongoing stuff. And so today we're going to be talking about a number of 10, we're going to focus on 10 lies from Dr. Michael Brown. I hate to even say this, even coming out of my mouth. But we're going to focus on those things because I think that's what they are. But I want us to first start by saying this. What are we not accusing Michael Brown of? Because one of the responses, of course, is that he's been accused of being a pedophile, of being all these different things. And this is thrown out as like a way of defeating valid accusations or valid claims. So what are we not accusing him of, just to clear the air?
Well, certainly not that. There's no evidence whatsoever of pedophilia. And we're not, there's no evidence of him being a lifelong groomer. As far as we know, these are two incidents that happened 23 years ago, and there's nobody who's come forward before or after. So we're not saying that he's living, the only reason we're talking about this 23 years later is because of the cover-up. And, some people say the cover-up is worse than the crime. And if you're a victim, then that's certainly not the case. But when people say that, they mean that in order to cover it up, you said it well a minute ago, Mike, you have to continue to hurt people, to deceive people. And it becomes this web that you cannot get untangled. Mm-hmm. So we're not saying that Mike Brown is currently living a deviant life. And I trust that he's not. And we're also saying that Mike has been a great value to the body of believers. So much of who I am today is a result of his input into my life. So much of just my own pursuit in academics, was largely, because of him and his encouragement. So, I love Mike. I care for Mike, and I'm praying for him every day that he just comes fully in this light and just deals with this in a full way so that he can move on with what I believe would be a clear conscience.
Yeah, it's the cover up. It's the continually digging the hole deeper and deeper that has happened and continues to happen. It seems even right. Everything that's happened basically has been part of that, even recently. And we do need to deal with that. We're not accusing him of having some harem. We're not accusing him of other sorts of things. That is not the case. Actually, my biggest issue, the reason why I'm going to bring this up is because it's not an old, dead, past issue. It is an ongoing issue of cover-up of an old issue. And that makes it an ongoing issue. And so it should be addressed. And it's part of the same pattern of behaviors that I've seen in so many other groups. This is why there wasn't accountability for Mike Bickle until social media started making it happen. This is why there wasn't accountability for Sean Bowles until social media started forcing it to happen. And you could keep going down the list of guys who still don't have accountability because it just hasn't gotten public enough yet. And
many of these guys are submitted not to New Testament elders, and they're not necessarily part of a regular New Testament congregation where they fellowship and eat pizza together and do it, prayer meetings. They are on a ministry circuit, and their only accountability is to a board. And that board could be their friends. It could be family members. It could be a combination of both. But it's typically people who are not willing to hold them accountable unless there is incredible pressure coming from the outside. So for those who decry the use of social media, I agree. It's not ideal. It's not God's primary way. It is his primary way is through New Testament elders who are concerned about truth. But you have these boards who in some boards, you might even have unbelievers. So how are they going to judge a minister according to the standards, in the Bible? Mm-hmm. So I believe that God is using social media, podcasters, et cetera, in this moment. But I pray that one day it would be the rightly appointed group, New Testament elders.
Right. I agree with that. And there's plenty of the social media stuff that's garbage, and that's just people seeking their own carnal motives or wanting to just titillate the ears or whatever. But there's plenty of that. But there is also a properness to saying accountability will not come through the proper means. Let's go to the people and let's try and see if we can create it. And that can be a very positive thing. And I don't think Mike Bickle ever would have been found out if it wasn't for that. No. I don't think he ever would have been found. And I think anybody who denies that is probably just part of cover-up culture, and they're worried about it being taken away from them. It's, when you just have your powerful friends with mutual interests, and they're the only people that can hold you accountable. You don't have, for me, the elders at my church don't benefit from my ministry in some direct fashion. You know what I mean? They would call me out. If they knew I was in an adulterous affair, they would call me out, and I think they'd issue a public statement if they felt like they should to tell everybody I need to be pushed out of this ministry. And that's a healthy thing. That's in my local body that exists. But if you don't have that happening, then what are you gonna do? So okay, we're probably getting in the weeds a little bit. Can we back up? Can you just back up and give me a big picture? And I want to mention before we get into that, I also have appreciated Michael Brown. I've defended Michael Brown. I've lost subscribers and followers, which I'm okay with, because I was in defense of Michael Brown. I bring him on. I recommended his books, did an interview with him. And I knew doing it that I was going to be sparking controversy and giving myself headaches. And I was okay with that because I really appreciated his contribution, especially to answering Jewish objections to Jesus. That series was, I thought, really, really useful and helpful and unique. And still like it, actually. But this is because I was also brought into and involved in some of the cover-up when he met with me back in November of last year. And he shared some stuff with me that was not true, and I'm going to hold him accountable for that publicly, because this has to do with re-victimizing someone who was already hurt in the past. And I'm not getting sucked into that cover-up stuff. So this will also cost me on the other end, but I'm doing this because, at least in my opinion, it's the right thing to do, especially because I was personally brought in. And if I don't do this video about Mike Brown, even though I've promoted him elsewhere, I think that is me playing favorites at that point.
Right.
Being dishonest. So yeah, we're going to share this stuff, and we hope that it ends up in the long run bringing benefit to him. But whether it does or not, I think it will bring benefit to the body if we can try to graciously recognize when cover-up culture is happening and try to help put a stop to it. And that means being honest about what's going on. So anybody who's going to shame you or me or these witnesses for coming forward and sharing truth, I think you are on the wrong side. Using phrases like accuser of the brethren, that is, Satan knows how to say that too. Right. One of Satan's favorite phrases is accuser. Don't be an accuser of the brethren. He loves that phrase. So let's just be wise and biblical and say, oh, no, the scripture says that the elder who is sinning, you rebuke in the presence of all, that the rest also may fear. That this sense of insecurity people feel because of these videos I've been making or that you've made, and they're like, well, I don't feel safe now with you, Ron, or with you, Mike. I don't feel safe because what if you expose me? And I want to respond and say, yes. While it's not my job to expose everybody, it is proper that you don't feel safe. I should not feel safe. Ron should not feel safe because there are standards that we are externally required to hold to as Christians, especially leaders who should be judged more strictly. So anyway, that being said, Ron, if you could, man, what is like the telescopic from a million miles away, just glancing at everything that's happened? Can you give us like an overview? Because this is sort of a post-mortem at this point. It's
important that you understand the background. I didn't show up out of nowhere and say, I'm going to publicly, expose Dr. Michael Brown. We've known each other since 1984, and we've been friends most of that time. Was it 40 years? We were together at the Brownsville revival, and Mike is a dynamic minister, a dynamic personality. And at the end of the time at the revival, he was let go, and there was a split. And we did have a falling out at that time that lasted for about 8 years, and then we reconciled. And when we reconciled fully. I mean, we went on vacation like within months. It was like nothing ever happened. And it was beautiful and wonderful. Some people have wondered if I have some sort of obsession with Mike, wanting to bring, God forbid, if I fear the Lord, that I would purposely torpedo somebody who's probably the greatest Messianic Jewish apologist in the world. Like you mentioned earlier, his Answering Jewish Objection series. So God forbid that I would ever be a part of anything like that. I have loved Mike. In 2018, he was attacked by a conservative minister in Israel and labeled a false prophet publicly. Nobody went after that guy like I did, trying to get him to repent. First of all, I don't think you can declare somebody a false prophet by yourself. There needs to be a counsel and consideration. It was over something that Mike has written a lot about that happened in 1988. And I was livid, and I went to his employer, and they made a statement distancing themselves. But it just shows how much I loved him. And just a year ago, in June, he was in Israel, and I took him down to the south, to the areas that were affected. October 7th, we did some filming together. I took him out to lunch. We had a great day together. And then it was a few months after that, in October, that I'm emailing him back and forth over something that happened. Somebody attacked both of us online, and I just sent him a little quip like it's a joy, to be brothers in this thing together. I loved Mike Brown. The idea that I've been waiting for an opportunity to hurt him is, if it's true, then I'm a sick person. You judge for yourself. I love the Lord, and I love Mike. But there are certain things that we can't do and we can't cover up.
From Jerusalem, with special interviews today with one of my dearest friends in the world, Ron Cantor. We've known each other since 1984. My friend Ron Cantor in Israel. In our history, Ron, we go back to 1984. Is that right?
Yes.
Speaking to my good friend, my dear friend for decades, Ron Cantor.
And Ron, if I can, let me just say real quick, for those who are thinking that about you, consider the following, is that what we're about to bring is evidence and multiple testimonies to try to establish facts. That's what persuaded me to go forward on this, evidence and multiple testimonies. The accusation that Ron is just going after Mike because of personal issues, you have no evidence at all. And you are basically creating a policy where you will ignore evidence and testimonies and just attack a person because you're picking a side or something like that, which is partiality, very thing that we're told not to do. So that being said, in all honesty, Ron, even if you were just axe to grind, it doesn't mean nothing that what you're saying is not true.
Right.
And we still have to handle these facts and deal with them.
And it's become a talking point and a narrative. Yeah. And what I have
right.
noticed over the last 7 months is there are certain narratives and talking points that are repeated by Dr. Brown and those close to him that are repeated for a reason, such as the recent ones we saw a few, maybe 2 months ago now, where Raleigh, Washington, his new spokesman, said that my influence in Sarah's life, she was one of the victims, I made it 10 times worse than what Mike really did to her. I somehow sinisterly came in and said, "Hey, Sarah, let's, maybe this happened, maybe that." It's just absurd. And of course, we never heard back from Raleigh. I think he may have been a one-time spokesman.
Well, I'll tell you later. He ghosted me as well. He was supposed to be my point guy to help. I tried to clear this stuff up, privately, and he was supposed to be the point guy, and it didn't work out well. Yeah.
I think he may have resigned. Again, we haven't heard his name other than that one time in the Roy's report, I think.
Okay.
It wasn't a good week, I don't think, for him. And rightly so. People don't like being told that they've been brainwashed, that they've been manipulated. That is gaslighting. So going back to October now. So it's not October. It's October 2024. Mike and I are very close friends. He's a mentor. I look up to him, but we're buddies now. I'm getting ready to turn 60. He's getting ready to turn 70. And I have a friend, former student. I wouldn't call him a friend at the time. Somebody I knew, who gets in touch with me. I just gotten home from Jerusalem. I live in Israel. And I just gotten home from a prayer meeting and was checking my messenger. And there's a note from this guy. And he says, "I just wanted you to be aware that Mike Brown is being investigated for 2 situations of sexual sin." And when I read that, I don't have words to describe the inner turmoil that I almost fell out of my chair. I was like, what? No. It's like when your favorite sport team loses and you keep playing back in your head they didn't really lose, but they did. But this is far worse than that because people's lives are at stake. I just couldn't believe it. No, this not Mike. So I talked to this guy about an hour later, and he went through much of the details. And I said, "All right, I have to contact Mike." So I was stunned. For 3 days, I walked around my apartment in Israel. Literally, I didn't talk. My wife, she looked at me. I couldn't make words. I was just so shocked because Mike has a message called acharit, which is a Hebrew word that means the final end. It's a message he preached over and over again, and it's a powerful message. He preaches it at the end of the IHOP message, and it's a warning that if you knew, acharit means your final end. And you see it all through Proverbs, that if this person knew their final end, they wouldn't have done it in the beginning. Like a drug addict. If he could see himself dying in the streets, begging for money, he would not have taken that first hit.
Only could have seen the acharit. Only could have seen everything stripped away. Friends that have walked with God for years, ministers of the gospel. It takes a long time to climb up that mountain. It takes a long time to climb up that place where people respect you and you have a reputation for integrity and honor and trustworthiness. But you can fall from that mountain in 1 minute. You can open the door, 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 and then take 1 step and you're through it.
Mike was so strong with that message and disciplined. I just couldn't fathom that these were true. So I got a hold of him about 3 days later, and I said, "Mike, I am dreading." And by the way, all these emails can be read. What I wrote, his responses to me, I brought 2 more people, Matthew 18, in brownwitnessreport.com. I reached out to Mike, and I said, "Mike, this is an email I don't want to write you. I'm dreading, but you're my friend, and I don't know if you know, but you're being investigated, and I want you to know. And so I won't tell you what he said then, because we're going to get into that later. But that led to a series of conversations throughout the weekend where I then confronted very specific things that I was told between two women 23 years ago. And I came to find out that this had been confronted at least 10 different times over the past 23 years, but Mike had evaded responsibility. I didn't realize that I was number 10 or 11 in a secession. So by the end of the weekend, he had found out about this, he told me, 6 weeks earlier. And that weekend, I was coming into the States from Israel, and I said, well, let's talk when I get there. We did talk briefly. He told me a little bit more, that there was a girl or a woman, 20 years old, that was like a daughter to him, and he acted foolishly. That was pretty much what he told me. And he sat down with his board that weekend and told them, but he didn't tell them everything. He left out the other situation. So there were two situations, and I'll give you the very short version, and then we can open it up. So with one woman, Sarah Monk, she worked for him. She was a grad. She was like a family member, and she loved Mike like a father. But then he took it to what I would call a darker, more physical place, where there was hand holding, there was kissing on the forehead at least. Again, I'll tell you what I found out that weekend from him: hand holding, kissing on the forehead, smacking her on her butt from time to time, and then meeting late at night at Walmart. Just the two of them. And for us in the Brownsville revival, the idea of a married man doing anything alone with an unmarried woman was that was grounds for getting kicked out of school. You just never do anything like that. So as he confessed this, and by that stage, we're in the second phase of what I would call Matthew 18. I confronted him privately. I heard his denial, and then I brought two guys with me, and I said, Mike, here's specifically what I heard. And then he confessed, probably to about 65, 70% of what was being accused. And the next day I wrote him back and I said, Mike, listen, I understand that you think you acted foolishly and this was not really, and with the other woman, by the way, he said that there was a sinful soul tie. But there was no real description of what that meant. We now know after the investigation that it was a verbal, a textual email, and then a phone erotic relationship that progressed over many months until it got to a place that was quite unclean. And according to Ray, the husband, that included Mike pressuring this woman, Kim, into not sleeping with her own husband, which shows a desire for possession. You know, you're mine. You don't belong to him. You belong to me.
That is a direct assault upon the marriage.
Yes. And he pressured Kim to meet him in a public place. When I say public, I mean outside the home, privately. And she would not do those things. And so I didn't know all those details on that day, but just based on what I knew is that out of his mouth, a sinful soul tie, with Kim, and with the single woman, Sarah, 20 years old, there was touching of her butt, kissing on the head, holding her hand in front of a bunch of other students, and proclaiming that this is Sarah's like a daughter to me. That's why I can hold her hand. And then he continued to hold her hand in a car with students watching for several minutes. It was unsettling to the students who were in the car. And then meeting late at night at Walmart. So the next day I wrote him, Mike, with two others as witnesses. And I said, Mike, I understand that you think these are not that big of a deal. I said, but they're actually a big deal. And I know it happened 23 years ago, but this would be considered abuse. Certainly sexual harassment, touching somebody who works for you, touching their rear end on a regular basis. You can't do that and then deal with it on your own. And so I was so gentle. I said, Mike, you should have confessed this to your elders. He was the senior leader of a team of elders. I said, you should have confessed this to them 23 years ago and submitted to whatever discipline and restoration. And it wouldn't have been a career-ending sin. It is sin. Let's not make any mistake. But you could have been restored. And I said, but now your only hope really is to submit this afresh, to a team of elders who can adjudicate it, and I'll help you. I'll walk with you through the process. And he was not interested in that. And so we kind of broke off contact after that because I was not interested in continuing the conversation if he was not willing to deal with it honestly. So it wasn't long after that I felt it was now my duty to find out what happened. So I got in touch with the young girl, Sarah. Kim had passed away, and I didn't have any idea that her husband, Ray, wanted to speak with me. So through a mutual friend, I was put in touch with Sarah, and she told me a story that was much more severe, which included not just kissing on the forehead, but kissing on the cheek and kissing on the lips. Just a peck, but it was regular. It was something they would do at the end of the day. It was something they would do when they went after their grocery store visits. In addition to that, not only did he hold her hand publicly once, but then, and there's a clear escalation, which, I mean, I'm sorry, that would be grooming. You test the waters here, and it was without her consent. He didn't take her hand and, do you mind if I do this in front of other people? But he took her hand and then continued to hold it.
Yeah, he's the spiritual leader. He's the one that she's looking to provide wisdom, discernment, and in all honesty, set the boundaries of the relationship. And so he's pushing those boundaries, and it is escalating. This has been we'll talk about this later, but this is a pattern where he would minimize the nature of the relationship with people he talked to, and then you'd find out from Sarah it was actually more. It was actually worse than that, or with an eyewitness like Chris, who would say, I watched, and he tells us it was actually this, not that. And then you keep finding this out over and over again, and it happens so many times to find out, oh, it was more than you said. Oh, yeah. It was bigger than you said. Oh, it was worse than you said, over and over again, even 23 years down the road. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, you listening at home, Mike just mentioned Chris. That's Chris Bennett. And he comes into the story because he was in the car and saw the hand-holding thing. But his story will come out later. You might want to write down some of these names so you don't get confused.
Yeah. We're mostly interested in these two girls, Sarah and Kim. Sarah was the student who some would say groomed. I would at least say he's pushing boundaries, and he's creating a relationship that is unhealthy, inappropriate, and leading into very dangerous places. In fact, it seems already to be in a place. But then there's Kim, who is the woman he has a erotic correspondence with, erotic talking, and however, whatever forms that took, written or verbal. And
the reason we know about that, it's really interesting because if not for this one thing I'm going to tell you right now, nobody would ever know, because they wanted to keep this tight shut. The one outside person who knew about it was sworn to secrecy, according to the firefighter report. He was not even allowed to tell his wife. And this is from Mike and Nancy Brown. So whatever happened between Kim and Mike, apparently Mike wrote down on a legal pad a bunch of fantasies that the two of them had of each other. Now, I want to be clear. I don't know if Kim ever said those things or not. I just know that it was in his handwriting that he wrote it down. So I don't want to throw her under the bus. I don't know what she did or didn't do. What I know is what he's confessed to. And I know that on a legal pad, he wrote down these fantasies. Now, I only know that is because later, I believe it was in July, so 6 months later, after that relationship ends. The relationship he had with Kim was, I think it was the latter part of 2001, and it was escalating. It was, went from personal emails to intimate emails to erotic emails. And I can't give you all the timelines, but I know that it ended in early 2002. And so 6 months later or so, July, Sarah is house sitting at the Browns' house. They're out of town. They're house sitting the dog. And they tell her to sleep in their bedroom, which she does. Now, Sarah used to leave notes. And this is another thing that was quite egregious from the Heather Schott interview. Mike more than once, he talked about Sarah rummaging through their drawers.
Been house sitting for us, which she did a couple of times because we had this little dog. Nancy and I were away. And she was, for some reason, rummaging through some of our drawers and found a note I'd written. Somehow, Sarah was rummaging through our drawers, found that.
That is not what happened. And that's just not nice to say, because it puts an image of somebody who's snooping. But the fact of the matter is that Mike and Sarah just to show you how unhealthy the relationship was, used to leave notes for each other. Now, how strange would that be if there was a single woman out there that even if my wife knew about it, but if she didn't know about it, even worse, we're always leaving little notes, hiding. Mike would reach in his pocket. Oh, there's a note. So she'd put it in his Bible. And so she writes a note to him and puts it in the nightstand. When she opens the nightstand, she sees the yellow pad that in his handwriting. That's how she finds out about the fantasies between the two of them, or at least what Mike wrote down. So if she doesn't open that drawer, we're not talking about this today. So she finds it and she's devastated. It's shocking because even though Mike is pushing the boundaries with her, she doesn't yet fully understand that this is unclean what he's doing. But then she reads this and she's like, oh my goodness, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think she said something like, I'm not the only one. And this is clear, erotic speech. So she goes and confronts Mike with this not long after that. And he brings in his wife, Nancy. And according to Sarah, what she told me, and what she told Chris Bennett, remember that name, Chris Bennett, in 2020, same story. She said that Mike and Nancy sat her down. They said, we're glad that you found these notes because now Mike can repent to you and you can represent the entire student body. And you forgiving Mike is like the student body forgiving Mike. And,
Which this is part of the cover-up culture thing. It's like, where did this weird rule come from? You're going to random student, you're going to represent everybody. The only reason to say this is so that he doesn't have to have accountability for it. I get it. I don't want accountability either. I just have to have it anyways. That's just how it works. Nobody wants accountability. Like none of us do. Once you're busted, you don't want it. But it has to happen whether you enjoy it or like it or not. And yeah, this is an example of the cover-up thing is the one thing that's been consistent throughout the entirety of this entire thing. It's still ongoing. Even in my interactions with Mike Brown, it's been the same thing. It's been just continual cover-up, spin, half-truths, misleading information. It's been, we'll give several examples today, a bunch of them. So it's, anyways, I just want to help affirm that because I know that some people watching will not realize instantly how problematic that was. It might sound romantic. You're gonna forgive me on behalf of the student body. No, that's not okay.
No, it's not. It's severe manipulation. And she's 20 years old. They're in their 40s. She now is really confused and upset. And she decides that she needs to get out of there. And let me make this point. She was brought into Mike Brown's inner circle and she felt honored. You're in the middle of a historic revival. The Brownsville revival lasted for 5 years. 2 million people visited. It was beautiful and it was powerful. And she gets to hang out with one of the primary leaders of the revival. Be close to his family. And then it turns weird. So she came there to be a disciple. She came there to be on fire for God. She left in September of 2002, broken, backslidden, leaving God. And that's also written in what she wrote. So what happens is that as she leaves, people begin to get concerned, like, where did Sarah go? She's disappeared. And so that began some of the rumors. Because people saw them. People saw the hand-holding. People saw that they were closer than a 46-year-old man of God should be with a 20-year-old student. So there were many people within that community that they didn't get it. They didn't understand, and they had concerns. So that began a series of confrontations that we can get into later. So she left Pensacola, confused, angry, hurt. But right before she left, this is a big piece of evidence. She called up Mike and she's angry and she's upset and she tells him off and she says, I know what you did to me, the kissing on my lips, the, smacking my butt. I know it was wrong. Meeting you late at night at Walmart. I know that was not right. And what she did not know is that her sister was listening. Now, at that point, her sister would go on to say later is that we once you started hanging out with Mike Brown and Mike and Nancy Brown, we never saw you anymore. That became your life. You got sucked into that. And then, you just disappeared and went to Texas. But she said she overheard that phone call. She told her parents that night that she overheard that phone call. And she's written down. She testified to the firefight report. So that is evidence She couldn't hear Mike on the other line, but it did not appear to her that he was denying anything. So she moves away, and then others become concerned. And so these confrontations begin. We'll get into those later. But that is the issue we're talking about, a story of two different women, Sarah Monk, who's 20 years old, enthralled with her leader, just amazed that she's in the inner circle, and it ends up being not a sexual, in the bed, but what I would call a very romantic, intimate relationship with Mike. And then there is Kim, which was a sexual relationship. It just wasn't physical. And in terms of the timeline, from everything I can understand, the relationship with Kim would have been the latter part, probably the last half of 2001. It may have started before that, but at what time it became erotic, I don't know. And with Sarah, it seems that it started in around May 2002 and ended when she left Pensacola in September 2002. So they happened one right after the other.
To catch people up where we're at now and what we're about to do, we're going to go through. I asked Ron, hey, let's just find specific examples that cut through the noise, that show that there's a pattern of deception going on with Michael Brown dealing with this stuff. And so we have these like 10 lies that he's that you've outlined. We're going to walk through them and go through them in detail. Now, the reason how these came up is because as by now in the video I should have already summarized this, but as I've said, there's what happened 23 years ago. Then there is the pattern of cover up. And it culminated just the end of last year and this year when things went public. They eventually agreed to do this third-party investigation and to publish the results and to submit to the results of the investigation. That didn't really happen. The elder board, in response to the investigation that goes public, they then offer their interpretation of the investigation and their, in a sense, their judgment and rejection of elements of it. While they say they didn't reject it, but they did in reality. They reject specific claims, specific findings that seem highly evidenced, and they reject the term sexually abusive misconduct and just call it leadership misconduct. So this is what I start seeing as cover up and spin control, because it wasn't justified what they did. It was also going back on their word that they were going to submit to this thing. Then we have all this data. We have Michael Brown then starting to defend himself finally with this video he did with Landon, the shots, Mercy Culture, who seem like they defend anybody who has enough of a following. It's crazy. They're defending Todd White and defending, is it Sean Bowles now too? Anyway, they're just defending whoever they have to. And this is where we're going to try to cut through and draw specific examples from all of this pool of data. Lots and lots of witnesses have been gathered. An investigation has been conducted, and you're basically just agreeing with that investigation. We're not here presenting some unique, singular view that you've come up with. So that with that set up, these are going to be like 10 specific examples of lies and cover-up culture that have gone on around this issue that should be dealt with. And if the lies hadn't been said, they wouldn't need to be confronted. We're just responding to them here.
Right. And what we're showing is that there is a pattern of lying. So as we go through this, let me just say that truth is a really high value with me. I have a lot of weaknesses in my life, and if you hung out with me, you would see them. But truth is a very high value. And so it's been disconcerting to see how easily, at least in my opinion, Mike has been willing to lie to me and to others. So let's just start with number one. So in his first response to me, so remember back in October 2024, I emailed him and said, I'm dreading doing this, but I have to ask you about what I've heard. And so his response to me was, quote, I did hear some crazy reports about 6 weeks ago with some wildly false charges about me that allegedly were about to come out in an alleged report from Julie, that would be Julie Roy's, but they were completely untrue. So right out of the gate, he is lying to me right at the very first thing. I mean, that is a clear objective lie, because we know that they were not completely untrue. They were at least partly true. And if he'd said to me, Ron, listen, yeah, I heard too, and there is some truth to it. There's some lies to it. Let's talk. That would have been different. But he uses the words completely untrue and wildly false charges.
Yeah. As a sweeping statement of the whole thing. Not that, yeah, you could probably come up with something they asked him about that wasn't true, because that's
Sure.
the way reporting works. Hey, what about this? What about that?
That's where
What
the
about this?
grapevine works.
But the report actually was substantially true.
And neither did he give me any indication that for the past 23 years that different groups of people have confronted him about this. Like he acted like this was all brand new to him when in fact it was not at all. And then he asked me to tell him exactly what he heard. And, I've learned, I'm pretty gullible, but so I did, I've learned that is a tactic. You want to find out before you confess. You don't want to over confess. So this is what he's done to other people with Londa Parker when she came to his office back in 2002 about these issues. What do you think you know? What have you heard? And so
he did this with me in our phone call in a similar fashion. Of I was trying to not tell him what I remembered from our conversation and have him tell me what he remembered, but he wouldn't let me. He was finally like, "Tell me what you remember, Mike."
Yeah, and I found out, Mike, very quickly that he had lied to me, because by that weekend I was asking him specific questions as I learned more information. I can't remember if I had more information. I was simply terrified. And you have to understand that when you're confronting somebody that you love and respect, 10 years older than you, who's an intimidating figure, you don't just come in like a bull in a china shop. I was very gentle and felt guilty. But he lied to me, and I didn't tell him everything I knew in that first email because I was scared. But on Saturday, I laid it out in a document with me and two other people. And I said, because he was asking us by that time to defend him. Like he was hoping that his friends, in fact, that's probably why he was talking to you. He was looking for people to defend him.
I believe that is the case, and I share that with him as well. I believe that so in November at ETS last year, the conference, he pulled me aside, for those who don't know, and asked me if we could talk. Hey, can we make some special time to talk? And in hindsight, the entire flow of the conversation, I think I was being set up to be on his side and potentially to help defend him, because he knew stuff was coming down the line. And when I look back at that conversation, there's some specific things he said to me that were not true. Some were just misleading, and some were just a lie. Yeah.
Do you want to bring those up now or later?
Sure. He told me that Sarah had gone to, and I submitted this to you guys in the report that you put out, which I'll link down below as well. Which is like, how many pages is this? 150 or something?
135, I think.
Yeah, 35 pages of stuff. So my part of that was to say, he had told me that Sarah had gone to a counselor and received some kind of memory recovery therapy, and this fabricated memories. So that's why she was now bringing accusations to him that he's like, I don't know where this came from. That never happened. And it was all like a lot of that. And I can't recall if he said he heard she went somewhere to a counselor, or if he knew for a fact she went and got a counselor and did this memory recovery thing. But he adamantly tells me, even now, still says he never told me that, and he never said it to anybody. He says, I've never said it to you. I didn't say it to anybody. I'm 100% confident. 100% confident he said that to me. I did not make this up. Hey guys, Mike, I'm cutting in here again with the edit. I want to share something now that I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to share when me and Ron first recorded this. But I played the video for, let's say, a friend of mine who wanted to see this, and I wanted to talk with him and get confirmation. So I don't mean to be evasive or weird, but the guy wants to stay anonymous. But I'll say this. There was somebody who called me because he was trying to figure out what was going on with the Michael Brown stuff. And we spoke on the phone for a while, and he spontaneously volunteered that Brown had privately told him about Sarah getting memory recovery therapy, or at least Brown had put into his mind that Sarah had gotten memory recovery therapy. He led him to believe this. Now, he volunteered this info, and I stopped him in his tracks. I said, wait a minute, stop. Please say that again. This is really important. He said, what to you? And we talked about that for a few minutes. Unexpectedly, I wasn't looking for it. I didn't know that there was anybody else he had said this to, because he denied to me over the phone, said he didn't say it to anybody. And that was a good reason to think that I was just remembering it wrong. But I now have another witness. And not only is there him, but also he told it to his wife. He went to his wife after the fact, and she heard his part of the conversation, and they also discussed it. And In that conversation, he tells her about the memory recovery stuff, that it was put into his mind. I'm using my words carefully here. Put into his mind. Words were said by Dr. Michael Brown that put into his mind the belief that she had gone to a counselor and received memory recovery therapy. I am not alone in this. This is very disappointing. And he not only told me over the phone that he didn't tell me that, he told me he never told anybody that. And he used that as leverage to try to convince me that I was remembering wrong, which I consider to be, if true, that's good. Tell me I'm wrong. But if not, it's high-level manipulation and lies after the fact, which is part of this whole culture of cover-up thing. I'm not going to be party to a culture of cover-up.
Right. And I can tell you that in a letter he wrote to my leadership team as he was getting very concerned about me, because again, I came initially in love and compassion and willing to walk with him through a process, but it got intense very quickly. And he wrote my leadership team to try to get them to yank me. You know, these are my peer leaders. And he wrote, Nancy and I want to reach out to Sarah, as per our statement, regardless of how much others have gotten into her ears in recent years and to what extent her memories have changed. So he's clearly planting a seed there that her memories have been changed. This was just after I met her. He wasn't referring to me getting in her ears, because I didn't know anything about this until October of 2024. But he seems to think that there are a bunch of people that were kind of urging her to, didn't he do this? But the truth of the matter is, and here's the truth, folks, she only talked to two people. One was Chris Bennett in 2020. We're going to learn about that later on. And the other was Amber Rhodes just after Mike went to IHOP, who reached out to her with the same question. Was there more? Again, there's a group of maybe 50 people that have questions in their mind about Mike Brown's relationship with Sarah Monk because it was so confusing back when things took place. So she was the second person, Amber Rhodes, she was the second person that Sarah opened up to and said, yeah, something happened. But until 2020, Sarah never told anyone. So the idea that there's a group of people putting memory, there is no group. So certainly when I came along to her, I just listened to her story for an hour and a half.
The nature of this is he has to ruin the reliability of her testimony in order to establish his own testimony on these issues. But because we can show he has a pattern of being deceptive and manipulating and giving half-truths throughout the course of time to many, many people, it only bolsters the credibility of Sarah's testimony. And my own experience, to offer a small piece of this, is that I'm confident he tried to mislead me, and then later tried to mislead me about misleading me. And that is shocking and unexpected. And I would never have thought he would do that. Okay, that surprises me. I'm not mad and angry over it, but I think I have a responsibility for the sake of, say, Sarah, whose name is being besmirched here, to speak the truth about this issue.
Yeah, and that's a side of Mike that you only meet when his back is up against the wall. Sadly, he's capable of misleading, lying, gaslighting in order to save himself. That is my opinion. And by the way, I keep saying things are my opinion because presently Mike Brown is threatening me with a lawsuit, or at least his lawyer is. Okay, so just finishing up on that point number one, the reason I asked him to answer these specific things after he told me that everything was false, and then he answered them, confessing to most of it, was because he was asking us, and many of his friends have big platforms, bigger than mine. And what he was hoping that people, and I believe like you, Mike Winger, that they would defend him. He needed them to defend him. So it was based on that he did something that he hadn't done with others for the most part, which was, I shouldn't say others. He doesn't always do, which is to answer by email. Because once you confess, that becomes public record if someone wants to make it public. So that's why he ended up confessing at that point. Okay. If this is all anyone hears from this video, I mean, I hope we can put like a chapter point here, because this is the most egregious thing of just about anything he said, in that absurd interview. But when he told Heather Schott, in fact, let me go ahead and just play it for you.
Right. But I'm going to set this up just to remind anybody who gets a little lost in the names. Kim was the woman who he had a erotic relationship with.
Married
woman. Yeah. Married mother whose dad was working for him in the ministry. And now whose husband, not dad. And now what he's trying to do is distance himself from the gravity of what was happening there. And it's with something that is simply a lie. And this is example number 2.
I was Mike. I was not Dr. Brown. I was not her pastor. I was not over her spiritual. I led the school of ministry. She was not a student in the school.
Yeah.
He's going to say that this is not clergy sexual abuse because they were peers,
Right.
And so just for folks who are not familiar with that term, the idea of clergy sexual abuse is the idea that a powerful pastor, minister, evangelist would use their status, their celebrity, their anointing in order to, Mike Bickle is a perfect case, to draw the vulnerable into a sexual relationship. That is clergy sexual abuse. Where if Mike Brown were the plumber, Kim probably would not have ended in that type of relationship with him. It was because of his position. And so let's go ahead and just listen to this. Okay, so as somebody who was around back then, I want folks to understand that Mike was bigger than life. The idea that they both worked in the church, like it's First Community, this was the Brownsville revival with 2 million visitors over 5 years, hundreds of thousands of people getting right with God. A Bible school came out of it. So the 4 principal leaders were celebrities. I don't mean that necessarily in a bad sense, but they were known. And Mike was one of those leaders. He was the in-house scholar. If anyone like Hank Hanegraaff came after the revival, it was Mike. He wrote a book. What was it called? Do Not Be Deceived. He was the in-house scholar resident scholar when it came to the revival. Not to mention that he had a regular Saturday morning. Understand, people came from all over the world and they would come for like a week. So we had services Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, and then Saturday morning or afternoon, all those visiting pastors, which could be hundreds, would meet with Mike because he was a brilliant preacher, scholar. And so the idea that they were peers is technically impossible. Were they friends? Did they do fun things together that friends do? I'm sure that they did. But again, if he were the plumber, they would not have been in that relationship.
Yeah, they didn't just go to the same church.
Exactly. But
they're not just attending the same church. They're in a very particular environment where he has this leadership pastor relationship, high leadership. I mean, apostle, could I say? I mean, I don't know what he was considered.
Not in that. If anyone played the role of the apostle, it would have been John Kilpatrick, though he would never use that terminology. He was the leader among leaders. There were 4 principal leaders. John Kilpatrick was the primary leader. The buck stopped with him.
Yeah. And so his relationship with them was not, it's misleading. Yes, they went to the same church, but it's misleading to couch that as the definition of the relationship.
Yes, without a doubt. And then it moves into inappropriate behavior where Mike is calling Ray on the phone, and then he's saying, "Hey, Mike loves to share good news. Ministry. There's always a breakthrough. There's always a new opportunity and a new book being written." And so it started with Mike calling Ray, but then he would say, "Hey, put Kim on the phone," and then it ended up with Mike just calling Kim. And then emailing Kim back and forth.
The following is an excerpt from Ray's testimony on brownwitnessreport.com, page 13. Ray says, "I was getting really tired of so much of Mike's imposing on a daily basis. I began expressing my uneasiness to my wife. Mike would call on the phone and talk to me, sharing some good news about a breakthrough in ministry. And then he would say, 'Put Kim on, let me tell her.' It seemed harmless, but eventually, Dr. Brown began to call Kim directly. There was too much of Mike in our lives."
And then in the interview, it's like, we're all, everybody's emailing everybody, Nancy and Ray.
And all of us emailing back and forth when I'm writing a new book, sending it to the husband and wife. They're each sending me their comments. And Nancy's, "Hey, I heard from them today." Because we're just interacting constantly. Nancy would email the husband,
But Ray's like, "No, I never emailed Nancy." And I know Ray. I know Ray and Kim personally. And Ray actually ended up reaching out to me. I hadn't seen him in 25 years. And he ended up reaching out to me in December. And the reason he reached out to me...
Hey guys, Mike Winger cutting in here to add some needed information for you to have. This is not just a he said, she said thing. This is all very important. The reason why Ray reached out and decided to open his mouth and speak publicly about this issue for the first time in over 20 years is because he found out that Michael Brown had told Chris Bennett, according to Chris Bennett, and I do think he's telling the truth, that he portrayed this discovery that Sarah made, where she found this yellow pad with writing that was erotic in nature. He portrayed this discovery as though it was one-sided, as though it was coming from Kim to him, and he just wrote it down. I'll quote from the article here. Brown reportedly claimed that she said something inappropriate that caught him off guard, so he wrote it down. This implies that he is just an innocent guy who is, trying to do the right thing. This is very far from the truth, and it creates a very false impression in the mind of those who hear it. There's multiple people that he gave this impression that it was a one-sided thing because he didn't give any other details other than what he said about that. So this caused Ray to reach out, and he is now public on brownwitnessreport.com. His statements are there, and I think that they're very relevant. And they're not alone. There's many witnesses to corroborate the fact that Mike Brown's just not giving consistent and honest answers.
When the first article came out, that Kim, his wife, said something to him that was inappropriate, and he wrote it down. And by the way, if you listen and read to every different answer Mike has given for his relation with Kim, they can't all be true. Because he told Mike Labanovic, also an elder and leader in the FIRE movement, he told Mike when he confronted him in 2023, he said, yes, she wrote me something that was inappropriate. So I printed it up and I showed it to Nancy, his wife, and we were going together confront her. It's just all these different stories.
I confronted him on this, Ron, in our phone call. I confronted Michael on this, and I said, hey, you misled Mike Labanovic, because he was like, give me an example of me using half-truths to mislead people. I was like, you made it look like this was just her corresponding to you, her writing to you something inappropriate, and you recording it for accountability purposes. That's what you made it sound like. And he told me his defense of this was that, and I have it, the whole conversation is recorded because he wanted to record it, so he can share the whole thing if he wants. But his response to this, and if he does, that'd be fine by me. But his response to this was that he didn't share more with Mike because he was defending the honor and protecting Kim and everyone else.
How does that protect Kim?
So my pushback was, that doesn't make sense, because the person who you put on the hook was her, and the person you got off the hook was yourself. Your version of defending her is you defending yourself. It was like talking to a brick wall. I'm going to read to you guys from the actual audio transcript, my transcript that I've written up of the conversation I had with Dr. Michael Brown. He asked me not to share the audio unless one of us had misquoted it publicly. It's kind of a strange request. It implies that we can quote it publicly, but not play it publicly. And I agreed, and so I'm going to honor that. I confronted Michael Brown about Mike Labanovic specifically, and I said, you misled him with a half-truth. His response was, I said as much as I could say without dishonoring spouses further, but always consistently. I replied, what I hear you saying is you were trying to protect her and other people, and so you shared only certain parts of what happened. But the thing that's inconsistent there is that the parts that you shared were the parts that made her look bad. Michael Brown says, no, never. The piece of paper was what everyone asked me about because that's what Sarah found, so that's what I responded to. I replied, the parts you shared was that she wrote to you content and information that was inappropriate, and then you didn't share. The part you didn't share is that you also corresponded to her in similar ways. Mike Brown then, I think in this conversation, he's nitpicking on terminology, so I try to dodge it real quick, but he says, we didn't correspond. That's the first thing. I said, whether it's verbal or phone, you interacted. So I don't want to argue over the definition of words. The part that you shared made her look bad and brought embarrassment to her marriage, but it didn't. It protected you, not her. That's my point. It's not consistent with what you're telling me right now. Mike said, first, I was asked what was on the paper. Mike, I was asked, and I said as little as I could so as to protect her while telling the truth. And it was not up to me to say anything more than that we had sinful emotional tie, that we said sinful things to each other. All I was asked was what was on the piece of paper, and I answered honestly. I replied that she shared sinful things to you, but not that you shared them to her. That's what that sounds like. That sounds like you're protecting yourself and not her. Now, the conversation continued to go on. Eventually, we come back to this, and I said, to portray the story as though she was someone who was inappropriate towards you and you were someone who was trying to create an accountability record of it is misleading. Mike says, well, that's the truth. I replied, it's a half-truth that creates a deception. Mike says, in your mind, in my mind, I'm trying to honor spouses and do the right thing. I replied, well, her husband, Ray, did not feel honored. That's why he came forward. He felt like it was the opposite. He felt like you were protecting yourself and throwing her under the bus, right? And he said, no, that's not what happened. And he has a different account of why he thinks Ray came forward. Our phone conversation lasted for over 2 hours, and it's one of the reasons why I'm making this video now. This is actually really important. That the recounting of what were the details of written on this thing and how he answered objections, it wasn't that he exactly lied. It was that in many cases, he shares just enough of the truth to put a lie into the mind of a person who's listening to him. And that is what happened, I think, with Mike.
Well, it was Kim's husband, Ray, who wrote, and I'll get back to Ray in a minute, but he wrote just we made a YouTube video where I read a letter from him and a letter from their daughter, Jordan.
I'll link that below. It was really good, by the way. I'll link it below.
Please do, because it's just heartbreaking to hear, particularly from Jordan, the daughter. But Ray writes in there something like, Mike knows how to tell a truth, but not the truth. And that's what happens here is, Mike will tell a truth. She said something, but not the truth. And I said something too, so, and like you said, it doesn't defend her. It defends him. But in terms of getting back to Ray, so the reason Ray got in touch with me is because Mike appeared to throw her under the bus. Ray would have gone to his grave happy to never bring up this horrible issue in his marriage. And him and his wife, they reconciled beautifully. They lived another 20 plus years together, children, grandchildren, and I know some of them. I don't want to go into more detail, give away any identity, but they're dear, sweet, godly people. And so when Ray saw that Mike was besmirching her name, she passed. I didn't think I make that clear. She passed about 2 years ago. That's when Ray got a hold of me and he said, I have to defend my wife.
The following is an excerpt from the letter that Ray sent to Ron in response to all the stuff that Michael Brown has been saying.
To me, though, in the present, the most vicious twisting of perceptions is his explanation of the infamous nightstand notes. The evil embedded in his nuanced psyche is encapsulated within his short and simple response, quote, she said something inappropriate that surprised me, and I wrote it down. He had the audacity to accuse Kim of being the aggressor, all while making the claim that he wanted to protect me in my family.
Not only did Dr. Brown say this to Chris Bennett years ago and to me personally, I can also say and show you that he said this recently on the absolutely horrific Mercy Culture podcast.
But her participation, it changed the tone of things. So I had written down some inappropriate things that she had said to me. Again, I'm guilty of my part. She's guilty of her part. Just if someone accused me, you tried to initiate this or start this, I just written it down. Somehow Sarah was rummaging through our drawers, found that, messaged me.
This is inappropriate things that Sarah had said to you.
No, that's Sarah.
No.
The married
This is
woman.
the previous relationship.
There was never an
relationship.
inappropriate syllable between Sarah and me.
Things said by
with a
Kim.
married woman.
Right, Kim to me.
Yeah.
Right. That I was surprised when she said them, and then I wrote them down. I mean, I flushed them out of my mind all these years now, but I wrote them down in case anyone ever said, "Well, you tried to initiate this or start." It's like, well, actually, there's a whole other side here.
And so when we talk about Mike telling a truth but not the truth, it gets worse. This is the part that is so egregious. Mm-hmm. So when Mike says when we met, I mean, he knows this. That's the thing that's crazy. He knows what I'm about to tell you. And he didn't tell Heather. Maybe Heather knows it too, I don't know. But he had a very important information that would not have made him look good. And he held it back, as far as I can see, to save himself.
We got to know each other in that context, and we were peers. I was Mike. I was not Dr. Brown. I was not her pastor. I was not over her spiritual. I led the school of ministry. She was not a student in the school. And we became friends, Nancy and I.
and became really good friends. And we started to hang out a lot.
Because the fact of the matter is he was her pastor. When the abuse took place, he was her senior pastor. So he is correct when he says, when we met, we were both part of the same congregation. I was the president of the school. She wasn't a student of the school. I don't agree that they were peers. I think that'd be impossible, but technically correct. But there was a split. Mike was fired from his job, and then he started a school right down the road within a couple weeks. And that's a big part of his defense. He was just so burned out from going through the split.
What happened, again, no excuse, but in this same burnt out state, so I was physically burnt out. So I would go 70 to 80 hours a week of ministry related stuff. So I was physically burnt out. If you've been through a split, so emotionally I'm burnt out. And we were now under hellish financial pressure. I was in the worst, most burnt out state of my life. I mean, I told him I was struggling and burnt out.
But what he doesn't tell, and this is just dishonest, there's no other explanation for this other than that he was misleading Heather Schott and misleading you, misleading the body of Christ, not letting them know that by that time he had been fired, started a school, and they started Fire Church. Mike was the senior leader of Fire Church. I don't know if he called himself a pastor, but he was the lead elder. Nobody would deny that. It's written in places that he was the founder. And they started going to that congregation. And in fact, it was right around the time, May of 2001, that they started going to the congregation. And it was later on that year, in I think August 2001, that Mike convinced Ray to come and work for him.
So he's in a spiritual leadership role, and this is before the relationship starts to move inappropriate. When he becomes in the leadership pastoral, well, I mean, he already was in a leadership
exactly
role.
when the relationship became inappropriate. If I had to guess, I would say it was sometime in the spring of 2001,
Right.
and it progressed verbally and online. When did it become erotic? Probably not until the fall of 2001, at the time that he was hiring Ray.
Yeah, and the thing I want to highlight is in the interview, he's talks about when they met. He leaves out the details that would establish the real nature of their relationship, and that he was not only a spiritual leader to them, but then eventually a boss, an actual boss, an employer to the husband.
Senior pastor of the entire family and boss to Ray. But the thing that is so egregious about Mike hiring Ray at that time, let me just play this clip for you and it will be clear.
Was just every day was because we're in the same city now. We have two schools. So if you've been through a split, so emotionally I'm burnt out. And we were now under hellish financial pressure because of the split. And we still have the staff in the school, but we've got half the income. And we were building a house. We didn't have money for that. Our staff is not getting paid. Everyone's sacrificing together.
Yeah, so he's the context of him sharing that. I always want to give as much context because they took me out of context in that video. The context is he's saying why he was in a weak state. The split was a hellish thing. I was on the other side, and it about broke me. I would wake up at 5 a.m. with my heart racing. It was hellish. But on the other side, the appearances that they were giving is that life was great, that they're moving on with their new school and life is perfect, but apparently it wasn't. And he's saying that they were under a hellish financial burden, and he was personally burned out, which led to him doing those things. But he says they had no money. And he mentions his house that he was building. It was some have referred to it as a mansion. So while they had, no money to pay salaries, they're still, and Mike, understand, I don't believe at that time Mike was paid by the school. He had a very vibrant ministry. This is on the heels of the revival. So he had invitations. He was probably out every weekend, preaching and bringing funds in. But they had no funds to pay the staff. I have friends whose children have told me they went without food. They could not buy groceries. Nobody starved. People were generous, but they literally didn't have money to pay. And it's during that time that he hires Ray. So knowing what we know now, that Mike is pursuing Ray's wife, he's now her senior pastor, which makes it clergy sexual abuse. Mike leaves that out because he doesn't want you to know that. Very dishonest. And then in the midst of that, he hires Ray. So now Ray is his employee, and he pays him a market-worthy salary without fail every single week. Ray had no idea that other people weren't getting paid. He only found out that later on. And he says that the job was undefined. He did not know what he did, and he finally quit. Before the end of the year, he felt so weird about the job that he quit. But it would appear to anybody with common sense that Mike brought him on to keep him close because of his relationship with Kim.
That's deeply disturbing. When you're potentially here, the what it looks like is the use of what are way too limited ministry funds in order to employ somebody because of some weird personal agenda that he has to create relationships and connections for himself. The guy has a job. He's like, I'm not really sure what I'm doing. Why am I here? And he's getting paid when other people aren't. He's actually, it sounds like he hired Ray while they're at a low point, not able to pay other staff. So he's got other staff he hired.
It doesn't sound like that. That was the case. I mean, that's a fact. Mike shares that out of his own mouth. We couldn't pay staff.
Yeah, that's it. Well, we all know what it looks like. And so to couch it as a peer-to-peer relationship is, as you said, misleading. That is a lie. Yeah.
And then if you actually go and read Ray's letter or listen to me read it, he says that because they stayed friends for a while. I won't get into the whole how it was, because there's two different versions of everything. But after it was all over, they forgave each other and they tried to maintain relationship. Mike should have, by all accounts, gone to his eldership and confessed. But I won't go to the point in the video, but there's a point in the video where Mike says leaders are split on this.
Yeah, he said that. He said some people thought he should confess and some didn't. You know what? There's a clip. Maybe I'll find this clip and I'll insert it here for people to hear. But there's a clip where he talks about if you have a soul tie, one of the things you have to do is tell the people you're accountable to about it.
You have to be utterly ruthless with a soul tie. You have to tell those that you're accountable to or that you're close to. Like if you're a married man and you had a soul tie to another woman, and you got emotionally bound up with her, you have to tell your wife, a spiritual leader. You have to tell that person we can have no more contact. You ask God's forgiveness.
So he specifically calls out a soul tie and says, this is what you have to do. Here's the process you have to do. So he's not confused about the issue until it's applied to himself.
When everything's theory, it's so much easier. When James chapter 1 talks about rejoicing in trials, that is, every time I read that, I get this warm feeling inside of me until I'm actually in a trial, and it's a lot more difficult. So, but getting it back to that point, the idea that leaders are split.
I have discussed this, Heather, with many leaders, and there's a division. Plenty say because there's no physical adultery, you handle it the right way. It's nobody else's business. Why bring this to wider attention? Others have said, no, it's imperative that the other leaders were involved.
I would challenge Mike. Can you show me those leaders who are split on this? Because it's now been almost a year, and I've not yet met one leader who believes that you could have a sinful soul tie where you get into erotic speech with a woman, where according to the husband, Mike has confessed to this, you demanded that she not sleep with her husband, and you pressured her to meet you somewhere privately. I don't know anyone who says that you can go through those things and not take it to leadership. But you're 50%. I have not met anybody on the other 50%, and I just have to suggest that maybe you're making that up. Maybe that is just completely made up. Because if you look at all my emails between him and I, it's always, every leader I talk to tells me this. And it's always what he wants to hear. And, even a lawyer I talked to told me this. And it's either that he's setting them up by downplaying what has happened, or he's just not being honest.
Right. I think that's a good summary right there. One or the other.
So clearly, this is clergy sexual abuse. This is somewhere a member of the clergy, the senior pastor of the congregation, has now hired the husband, and that means that every week their paycheck is dependent on the generosity of that employer, who is also the senior pastor. So when you talk about clergy sexual abuse, you're talking about the power differentiation. So if there wasn't one when they met, when they were quote unquote peers, which I don't believe that was possible. They're certainly not peers now. Mike is the employer and he is the senior pastor. And what makes this so egregious is that he did not tell Heather Schott that information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's misleading. Very, very misleading.
So it's not just misleading, it's misleading to his own advantage. It's getting him out of jail. Because
what he wants to do, it seems, is get away from the idea that this was him doing something wrong in relation to his ministry position. Right? That this is clergy sexually abusive misconduct, which is actually what the investigation concluded. It was, quote, sexually abusive misconduct, to which his elder board responded, we reject that phrase and substitute our own. And we'll just call it leadership misconduct, because this is part of the damage control thing. It's you just face up to the music, deal with what it is.
When I had the opportunity to meet with a couple of the people on that board, I said, when you change those words, you deleted the significance of Sarah as a person. Because leadership misconduct can be a lot of different things, but clergy sexual misconduct, or sexually abusive misconduct, rather, that is something that is done to another person. And it was done to Sarah. By changing that, it was dishonoring and disrespectful. They didn't agree with me, but we had a very honest, open conversation. Getting further along in our discussion, number 3. So I'm going to play a clip from the interview.
Mutual, me responding to her emails, her responding to mine. And I had all my walls up as a leader. You don't meet together privately, but emails I didn't have a wall for. Like phone calls, meetings I did. But so we just got drawn in emotionally, and it ended up just being a very intense emotional affair.
So, I don't want to make fun of somebody who is grieving over their sin. I don't know. I don't want to judge that. I'm not going to say anything more about that. The concern I have is that if that affair ended in February 2002, and he is broken over the fact that he did not have a wall he had a wall for physical, I guess the Pence rule, don't meet in the same room as a female alone. He understood that rule, but he didn't have, and I get that. Females text me, and it's different. You got to make sure it doesn't move, that you're really talking about something that you're supposed to be talking about, and it's not, personal. So the problem is it doesn't line up with the history of everything that happened. Like, for instance, he didn't have his walls up for physical, for being with women alone. Sarah writes this in the brownwitnessreport.com. The one who condemns so many for a lustful eye, who screamed from the pulpit, repent of your sinful ways. The one who taught us to live holier than the day before. The one who preached revolution. The one who said being alone with the opposite sex was a sin and would get you kicked out of school. Yes, that Dr. Michael Brown was alone in his office with someone from the opposite sex, touching my butt as I would exit his office. So this is afterwards. So that's why the crying is a little bit, concerning, because you actually went further. You didn't go backwards. You didn't get stronger, according to Sarah. You got looser in your willingness to be alone. And
and multiple meetings alone and parking lots, which we'll get to that. We're coming to that one later. Okay, we'll save that for later. But there's other examples of this meeting alone. This wall was not up, in other words.
Right, and multiple witnesses saw them alone in his office. 2 people say they saw Sarah sitting in his lap alone in his office. Another staff member who is close both to Sarah and Dr. Brown, she said the 3 of them would always be alone in his office, and that she would also be alone in Dr. Brown's office. During a hard day, she was weeping into Dr. Brown's chest, not Sarah, this other staffer, and just the 2 of them alone in his office. I mean, I'm sure she was going through a difficult time, but she recognizes now it was highly inappropriate. But the most damning thing that you were alluding to earlier is what happened at Walmart.
But you met late at night at Walmart. Okay, hang on. I telling Nancy, hey, I'm on my way home got to stop at Walmart. Do you need anything? So if Sarah would want to talk, I said, hey, I'm heading over to Walmart. She texted me, where are you? I said, I'm heading over to Walmart.
So the problem with that is that Mike is giving the idea that him and Sarah, first of all, the idea of, I always put myself in the situation. I was part of that faculty group. And I'm trying to imagine myself at Walmart in a public place with a student, a female student, 20 years younger than me. I think I would be in big trouble. But that's not exactly what happened. Let's listen to what...
Yeah. This is, I want to hear everything you're going to share, but this is way worse than he makes it sound. I would rather her be in his office where at least you are surrounded by staff and anybody could come in than at night in a parking lot at Walmart. And he couches Walmart like it's some public hub where people who know them are all going to wander around the parking lot at Walmart at night and see them there. But that's not a public place. That is a private situation, very much so. And it's nighttime. And let's just be real about human nature. A man and a woman at night is worse than a man and a woman during the day. It just is.
And so, according to Sarah, most of the time when she would arrive, he'd already done his shopping, and they would sit in the car alone and talk. These are her words. Many late nights, he and I would be chatting on instant messenger. By the way, this is just 6 months or 3 months after realizing that he didn't have his walls up regarding, texting. So many late nights, he and I would be chatting on instant messenger while he at his office and I was at home. He would ask me to, very important here, he would ask me, if you go and listen to what he tells Heather, it's she asking him most of the time.
That's how he presented it to me too.
Right.
She was like, I need to talk. I've got some problems I want to resolve. Oh, well, I'm on my way to Walmart, which I initially in our first conversation thought it was one meeting, one time at Walmart. And I was like, okay, well, one time she's in a crisis. And you're like, I'm at Walmart. Just meet me here. Not wise, but more understandable than like, how do you end up at Walmart 3 times? 5? How many times do you think they did this?
It was, according to her, it happened. It was a regular event. He would stay late at work and, Mike works late. He writes a lot. And so he'd probably leave, I don't know, 9, 10. So, and by the way, I thought the same thing when he first told me about this, and he told me to put his arm around her. I don't know why he told me that. But he said, they'd be at Walmart in a public place and he would put his arm around her and she'd be, telling him about his family. He made it, I thought that was one time as well. I went back and reread it and it's a little bit, Mike's very good with words, but I had the impression that it was a one-time event because she was having family trouble. But this is Sarah. And again, Sarah, as far as I know, has never lied to me. Mike has lied to me a lot. He would ask me to meet him at the grocery store to go shopping. I would leave my house and meet him. By the time I got there, he would be done, waiting for me in the back of the parking lot. We would chat for a few minutes in his car and then say our goodbyes. Sometimes it was just a...
I want you to read the whole thing, but I don't want anyone to miss the significance of this. We are responding to public statements that are not true that Mike Brown keeps making in defense of himself. That's why we need to respond. This is not nitpicking. This is about letting truth and accountability happen, which is what was supposed to happen when a third-party investigation took place that his elder board then rejected. So we need to go through this. But he, with Heather on tape, but also with me and you privately, made us think that it was her who instigated these meetings and that Walmart was a very public location. 2 things she says in her statement there conflict with that. One is he asked her to meet, not the other way around. And 2, back of the parking lot. So he's deliberately parking away from the public, away from the people who would see them. That's what that sounds like.
And that would be wisdom, because if he's caught, that could be the end of the entire school. I mean, his message was at such a high level of purity and holiness. I mean, this is behavior that to this day, as the former students have found out about it, they're just stunned, because even for the ones who may have had issues with Dr. Brown, they just didn't think he was capable of this type of behavior. So, but he's not being honest. Again, yes, he was, by the time I got there, he would be, forgive me for laughing. It's just so crazy. By the time I got there, he'd be done waiting for me in the back of the parking lot. We would chat for a few minutes in his car, then say our goodbyes. Sometimes it would be just a hug, a smack on the butt, or a kiss goodnight. And she was clear to me that would be a kiss on the lips. I never actually helped him grocery shop. These late night meetings happened a lot. So again, he led you to believe that it was one time. He led me to believe, at least that's what I believed, it was one time. And
I'm pretty sure on our phone call when I confronted him on this, I said, you led me to think it was one time and she instigated it because of a family crisis. And he was like, well, I didn't say that. And I said, you led me to believe it, which I'm being careful with my words too. You did lead me to believe that. And then I said, how many times did you meet? And I'll have to check the transcript, and I'll put up text or something to confirm if I'm getting this wrong here on the screen right now. But I think he told me 3 times, maybe 3 times. So it sounds like for her testimony that it was a lot more.
Yes. Well, these late night meetings happened a lot. Does that sound like 3 to you?
No, it sounds like a lot.
So yeah, she said these things happened a lot, and she's got nothing to gain from this. She's not getting money. She's not looking for money. She's not suing anybody. She lives a quiet life in Texas. She's a good woman, married, loves her children. This has been a huge disruption to her life, but she came forward because it was the right thing to do. And Mike, on the other hand, has a lot to lose if this information comes out. So that's kind of why I'm inclined to believe her. But then she goes on to say this. Sometimes we would sit in his car, again, late at night. Once, fire elder and leader Keith Collins saw Mike and I in his car and became concerned. To be clear, any fire school of ministry student sitting in a car of someone of the opposite sex late at night would be disciplined and probably kicked out of school. Mike was the president, and I was on his staff. Mike has admitted to this encounter because there are 2 witnesses, me and Keith, but there were many more times that he would call me to meet with him late at night. And here's Keith Collins. So just so you know, Keith Collins is, because you'll hear about him later. He is an elder in this. This is a new school, fire church, fire school, and Keith is a faculty member and an elder. So Keith wrote this on the same issue. I confronted Dr. Brown 23 years ago due to the fact that it was brought to my attention that he was seen holding Sarah's hand in a vehicle. That was the one that Chris saw, as well as the fact that he was with Sarah at Walmart alone, which was witnessed by Darla, that's his wife, and me. So this leader comes to Walmart and, I think he was getting paint or something, and he sees in a parked car Mike and Sarah, and he's shocked and he's stunned, and he doesn't confront them right there on the spot because I wouldn't have. I would have been too scared. I mean, you just don't want to be the person catching somebody in that. But eventually, as more people begin to talk about their relationship, he and another brother do talk to Mike about their relationship, and we'll get back to that later. So just to be clear, if I was a faculty member back at that time, I was 36 years old. If I was in my car in a Walmart with a 20-year-old student or staff member, I think that would have been the end of my career there and maybe the end of my ministry. So Mike is constantly making light of these things, but these are serious issues. Okay, let's move on. And it kind of dovetails with the Walmart, but it has to do with his assertion that everything was done in public on purpose because it's in public and people can see.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if Sarah'd want to talk, maybe something's going on with her family, you just wanted to chat. I said, hey, I'm heading over to Walmart. She texted me, where are you? I said, I'm heading over to Walmart. Why Walmart? Because that's the one place where there were people.
It's a public place.
If I wanted to have a secret meeting, there's like 1,000 places.
You'd say, meet me at my office where I'm out by myself.
Right, exactly. Or go, and we didn't have security cameras all over or any school where there's nothing going on. The whole, you met at Walmart. It's the most innocent thing. I call Nancy, hey, I'm on my way over to Walmart, meeting Sarah there. Need anything? It was that. It's in my journal. Sarah at Walmart. It's the most innocuous thing.
So I'm going to say it's not the most innocuous thing for a 46-year-old married man, leader of a Bible school, being alone at a Walmart. In fact, here's what he wrote me. I forgot I had it right in front of me. When he addressed it back in October. It was the Walmart nearest their office. Sometimes if she had a rough time at home, she would want to talk with me. So I intentionally told her I would talk with her at a public place. I would put my arm around her like I would a daughter, idiotically, but intentionally in public. And I would just say that if you're a student of that school and you show up at that Walmart, again, we know now that it according to Sarah, it always happened in the car. But even that, I don't know how Mike doesn't understand how troubling that is. If you're a student and you walk into that Walmart and you see a man that you love and you respect and whose motto is unto death, to the ends of the earth, and he has his arm around a attractive 20-year-old staff member, that's confusing. Like, you're probably not going to confront him because it's horribly uncomfortable and intimidating. But what do you do with that information? So, not innocuous.
Not innocuous, not the most innocent thing. If someone was meeting with your daughter late at night at Walmart on a regular basis, sitting in the car and talking together, you wouldn't be like, that's got to be like the most innocent thing that you can think of.
Yeah, and then
that's gonna happen. Yeah, a married man who's older, who's a spiritual leader, is meeting with a young lady late at night at Walmart in the parking lot.
But it's all intensified, Mike, because of the Brownsville revival intensity. Like,
right.
we were the best.
I've interviewed on my own. This is not public. I've interviewed 2 people who were part of it. Okay, 2 different witnesses who share with me what the culture was like, what the environment was like. And so, yeah, this was, to them, you can see it through their eyes. They go, nobody would have allowed anyone to do that.
No.
at that, especially him. And yet he was doing it. And he was violating the culture that he created because the rules just didn't apply to him the same way. Because he views himself as being that innocent. But I don't think that that's true.
Yeah, and she's also very clear that he was the one that called her. Quote, he would regularly call me or email me when he was leaving the office to go meet him at the store. And it was never because I needed to get out because of my home life. Now, he told you that, and he told me that. But Sarah says that was never the case. It was just the 2 of them hanging out. So, this whole point is that Mike says everything was done in public. And it was done in public on purpose so that everyone would see. But we know from Sarah and from others that it wasn't always in public. We know that there was other hand-holding incidents that we'll get into. We know that Chris Bennett, when it saw the 2 of them in a stockroom, as he was bringing books back after a ministry trip, saw the 2 of them in a full frontal hug alone in that room. We know that Sarah had unfettered access to his office by her own admission. And this other female staffer said that she was able to go in his office. In fact, she says that she would go into his hotel room on ministry trips and fix his hair. Just the 2 of them alone in, a hotel room. That is...
She's fixing his hair?
She's fixing his hair before he would go out and preach and making sure that his tie or whatever. To be clear, I don't think they were doing anything that would be weird if there were other people in the room. It's only weird because there were not other people in the room.
Yeah. And just to remind everybody, the purpose of sharing this is twofold. One, to establish the truth about what happened, because public statements are being made about people and the things they've gone through, in particular Sarah and Kim and Ray. But the second reason to do this is because it's part of a pattern of manipulation whereby he is gaslighting everybody. And I'm very sad to say this. I don't want to make this video. And what's funny is that in the shots, they were like, I think it was in their video, they were mocking people for saying, I don't want to make this video, as if they really secretly want to make, like, I'm sitting here like so excited I get to do this. This is lame. Okay, this whole thing is lame. This is not a win at this stage for anybody. It's only a win if it helps to change the culture of cover-up and create proper accountability, where leaders can't just stand up and proclaim their own innocence and then demonize the people that they've hurt. If we can stop that from happening, it's a win.
Right, and as I said earlier, if not for the fact that Mike just produced a video of him preaching and basically presents himself as a victim, who's gone through this horrible thing, being falsely accused, but he was contrite and broken, and it's a wilderness experience, and now he's coming out of that, as opposed to saying, just tell us what happened, or don't talk about it. You know what? Don't. Why even bring attention to it? So that, or else, Mike, I would not be making this video. But moving along, let's go to the initial confrontation. So let's play the clip on that.
Two guys among our leaders or staff come to talk to me and they say, "We're concerned you had an affair with Sarah." I said, "What?" They said, "We saw the way you're interacting." I said, "Yeah, I didn't use all the best wisdom with that, but it was completely innocent, just like with a daughter." "Well, we think you had an affair." And now this other has this other dream. It's like, what? Where is this coming from? So I said, investigate. So they appointed a couple. I'm not going to mention their name. They appointed a couple who was also spreading the word that we had an affair. And they call Sarah. She bursts out laughing. I've got all the dates. In November of 2002, they come to me, the couple, apologetic. "We're so sorry." Sarah calls me laughing on the phone. I noted in my journal, flabbergasted, like, what are they talking about? And I didn't coach her, tell her, don't say anything, because I knew there's nothing to say. The worst she's going to say is, he was a little too friendly. But that's it.
He was a little too friendly. He's touching my butt, kissing me on the lips, according to Sarah. Secretly holding my hand.
I always touch my friends on the butt and kiss them on the lips and meet them late at night.
Only when I'm being friendly,
When I'm being really friendly.
Ones I'm not friendly with, I don't do that with. But
a little too friendly. So this is called minimizing language for people who want to know it. This is minimizing language. And when somebody's actually genuinely contrite, they do not use minimizing language. They fess up to what they've done, and they don't even let other people do it in their presence. They say, no, what I did was not just friendly, it was inappropriate. It was wrong. It was sexually abusive misconduct, if you want to be consistent with the report, but it was definitely not in the friend category.
Yeah, and that's quite powerful, what you just said. When one who minimizes is not looking to be upfront and forthright. But the thing about just about everything he shared in that clip is not true. So first of all, and when you have 5 or 6 people giving one consistent story, and then you have somebody else giving a different story, I'm going to go with the 5 or 6. That's kind of how you do justice. So in this situation. Again, I'll just read from my notes. A little bit too friendly, full frontal hugs, touching on the rear, many times kissing, at least on the forehead, but according to Sarah, on the cheek and then on the lips almost every day, meeting alone in a parked car. So that's not being a little bit too friendly. But they didn't accuse him of having an affair. He says twice in that clip that they accused me of having an affair with Sarah, and he was incredulous. I mean, he's just shocked by this. But again, you don't understand. You don't walk up to Mike Brown. And I remember the atmosphere. I mean, he was now the revolutionary leader. He, left Brownsville and started fire school, and he was a bigger than life figure. Even if he was going through the worst moment of his life, and he was saying he was burned out, for those around him, he was still, the king. And so the idea that these two other leaders just came and accused him, I can't even imagine that. But let's just listen to their own words. So here's Nils Pripp. Nils Pripp is one of those two. The other one was Keith Collins. And he says, we never accused him of adultery. And again, this is written down. It's in brownwitnessreport.com. We never accused him of adultery. Never. You have to remember, this really wasn't a confrontation like everyone thinks. It was us going him to share our concerns about what we were hearing and what people were seeing because we thought it was inappropriate. Neither Keith nor I ever brought up adultery or an affair. So when somebody says you're having an affair, they mean adultery. And it would have been inappropriate for them to jump to that, but that's how Mike is presenting it.
Right. This is another classic tactic. So the tactic is someone says, I think that you disrespected me. And then they respond by going, you're saying I hate your guts? I can't believe you think I hate your guts. And now you're like defending them against this accusation you didn't bring in order to justify yourself. And all of a sudden, everything's lost. Your whole purpose, the reason why you were confronting is washed away. And it's looked at as a ridiculous. And they did this in the interview. The whole interview with with Heather Schott started by them laying accusations that, to my knowledge, nobody's bringing. No one seriously is bringing. Random stuff in comment sections, not like there's witness reports. There's tons of individuals who've shared stuff. They didn't start with that. They started with these like.
Immediately, I started getting calls from other pastors. This is September. Mike, is it true? Dr. Brown, is it true that you committed adultery with 3 women? I said, what? that had sex with 3 men? Yeah, no, of course not. Then I get another call. Is it true you committed adultery with 2 women and assaulted another? We hear that more are coming forward. I hear you assaulted a young woman, but I believe I believe in you. Is it true? I'm confused. I hear you're blackmailing people. I mean, crazy stuff.
Things that nobody's saying, so that then they could set this up as if those things aren't true, then it must be that that he's basically a good guy here.
They call that building a straw man. I made a video the other day about a certain minister from Redding, California, who talked about us. I used to be a minister, but now apparently I'm a podcaster. I'm just so you know, I'm an elder in a local congregation, and so
you're just an internet guy.
Yeah, I love these labels. So he talked about that the podcasters and on social media are saying crucify him, crucify. And I said, well, who's that? I don't hear that. People are calling for accountability. So you're building a straw man, and the straw man is that there's a big, huge, massive people out there wanting to crucify these people who've fallen into sin, and they can never be forgiven. That's what he said. That the mob is saying they can never, and that is not true at all.
There is no place for repentance anymore. When a leader fails, the crowd wants to crucify him. The Apostle Paul would have never been able to be in ministry. If I'm a business guy and I fail, I get to keep my job. If I'm a pastor, we will exile you to Mars and you will never be forgiven.
The people that I know who are broadcasting on social media and bringing light to these issues are calling for repentance and forgiveness. Nobody's calling for crucifixion. He literally claimed that they need to be put out of society. That's what we are saying. God forbid. I want Mike Brown to come into the light. I pray that every single morning. Lord, bring Mike and Nancy into the light. That's all I want for them, is to come fully into the light and to be free and to be forgiven. So here what Mike is doing, it's a straw man. Like they accused me of something outrageous, so it couldn't have happened. But they didn't. According to Nils Prip, they never did accuse him of adultery. After that confrontation, or really it was an inquiry. It was more inquisitive than accusative. But after that, Mike was asking them if they believed him, and Nils said, "I'm not so sure." Something happened during that meeting that would have caused anybody to lose trust in Mike, because he revealed something about Nils that was private in front of somebody else, almost like, I've got stuff on you. And Nils says, I shared that with you in private, several years ago. Like, why would you share that? Right? That's nothing to do with what we're talking about. So the fact that Mike would do that made him think that he's hiding something. So he said, "I'm not sure I believe your side." So that night, I'm going to read from his email that this is something that he shared with 1,400 students, former students rather, and faculty members back in December. That night, I got a call. So during the day, him and Keith have this confrontation or communication where they express concern about his relationship with Sarah, and they wanted more information. Mike said nothing happened. If anything, I was just too friendly, and he did not buy it 100%. That night, I got a call from Mike and Nancy around 10 o'clock, basically accusing me of trying to bring down the ministry, that I would single-handedly bring it down. It was a serious problem for the Browns that I did not come out of that meeting telling Mike that I believed him. They were very upset with me, and I was told, quote, "I don't see how you can continue to be a part of this ministry." In other words, he was fired. I did tell them I was planning on leaving anyways, so it didn't matter. I told them I would finish up some administrative stuff and be done. So they fired him because they did not. That is not New Testament eldership. That's not how it's supposed to work. If anything, you push it to the next level. But they got rid of him.
Yeah, this is what happens, though. This is what happened with Todd White. He just replaces his leaders whenever they get too confrontive or too disgruntled. He's just, boop, new ones. So it goes through different board members really fast.
And what's sad about this situation is Nils' wife, she, it wasn't long after that they bring them up at the church to lay hands on them and send them out. Like it's a positive thing, like they didn't get fired, like they weren't getting pushed out. And she was so hurt, on the verge of tears. She said, I wanted to scream and tell the students the truth, and she wonders today if maybe she should have.
This particular lie is he lied about the initial confrontation by Niels and Keith, saying that it was about him being accused of having an affair, which was, of course, ridiculous. And then he just says he was too friendly. He leaves out the fact that it was not about that. It wasn't the confrontation about an affair. Whether somebody thought that in the world, we're not saying nobody thought that in the planet Earth, but that wasn't what the confrontation was about. And then because he did not believe Mike, which it seems to me he should not have believed Mike, he was fired.
That is correct. You got that correct. There's one more lie he told there, and that is that there was another couple that was appointed to investigate, and when they called up Sarah, she laughed. Like, oh, it's so absurd. It's funny. And then she called up Mike and laughed even some more. Now, I just want you to imagine that you're a 20-year-old female staffer and two grown adults. You know that Mike Brown has held your hand. You at least, let's just take his version, in the car one time and a few nights at Walmart and touched your butt 5 or 6 times, even though she says it was my, let's just take Mike's, and then somebody calls you up that you don't really know all that well, and they say, I am concerned about your relationship with Mike Brown. I believe it is inappropriate. You're 20 years old. This person's an adult. You don't laugh. You're at that point, you're terrified. Even if you don't believe it, I mean, only the most confident person in the world would laugh at that point and then call Mike up and laughing. But we know it didn't happen because that person was reached out to. I know her name. I'm not going to use it. Mike and I both know who it is, and we both agree on who it is because he wrote down her name in his emails to me. So a mutual friend, got a hold of her, and here's what she said. She said, I did call Sarah privately on my own. No, they were never asked to be a part of an investigation. And it wasn't with her husband. It was just her by herself. However, I did call Sarah privately on my own, and I asked her why she left so suddenly, because there were too many incidences that I saw that seemed inappropriate to me. We spoke face to face with Dr. Brown and Keith Collins in Doc's office. He denied all and tried to dump a bunch of guilt on us. We left it alone and left it in the Lord's hand, knowing that he, the judge of all of us, would one day deal with all of it, which is happening right now. Let's keep reading. She, and I have these, you can see the screenshots. Again, no one ever told me to call Sarah. Sarah did not laugh out hilariously when I spoke to her. She was actually very solemn, and I did not believe her answer, presuming she didn't want to tell on Doc or was covering for Doc. Now, in that clip that you read, Mike says that this couple came back and repented and apologized. I don't know if you remember that part.
And they call Sarah. She bursts out laughing. I've got all the dates. In November of 2002, they come to me, the couple, apologetic. We're so sorry.
And that's the thing with Mike. He regularly has these stories about these people that he was at odds with, and they come back and repent. And I'm not saying that they're not all true. I know that other witnesses have said, well, no, not with that guy, not with that guy. I know with me, we had a falling out of the split. And in 2004, we had a meeting where we met at his office at my initiative just to see, can we get beyond this ever? I didn't know. And I was told later that the secretary asked what I was doing there because, again, I was kind of seen as a traitor. And he led her to believe that I had repented, and I had not. That was the whole thing. You still believe what you believe. I still believe what I believe. But can we be friends? Is there a way we can be friends? But
just
no,
moving past it. Yeah.
Yeah. So he presents this couple as having come back to him and repented. Again, you saw earlier, she said, we had that one meeting with Keith Collins and Dr. Brown, and that was it. Mm-hmm. And so,
right. And this is the couple he says accused him of having an affair.
Yes.
Not had questions about a relationship, but accused him of having an affair. And then later they came back and repented of accusing him for having an affair. And
yes.
What you're saying is the bookends, both of those things were not true.
Listen, her friend emails her on the 4th of July just a few days ago, and says, "Good morning and happy 4th." So now Mike Brown claims that both of you came back to him and apologized after talking to Sarah. Is that true? This is the response. "Oh, really? No, that is not true. We never spoke to him about any of it after the first talk in his office when he blamed us." So this is just, I don't know any way else to say it, but this is like my life with Mike Brown when it comes to issues where I don't think Mike just is lying all the time. I think when his back is against the wall and he's so good at it and so confident, because if you go back, let's just listen to that clip one more time with the knowledge that we have right now, because he is so confident. Here we go.
Mm-hmm. Two guys among our leaders or staff come to talk to me and they say, "We're concerned you had an affair with Sarah." I said, "What?" They said, "We saw the way you're interacting." I said, "Yeah, I didn't use all the best wisdom with that, but it was completely innocent, just like with a daughter." "Well, we think you had an affair."
So no, they don't think that they had. That's not what they said. We know that now. And the guy got fired for not believing Mike.
Fair. And now this other has this other dream. It's like, what? Where is this coming from? So I said, investigate. So they appointed a couple. I'm not going to mention their name.
So the couple says they were not appointed. She called Sarah on her own.
They appointed a couple who was also spreading the word that we had an affair. And they call Sarah. She bursts out laughing.
So again, bursting out laughing. A 20-year-old girl gets accused of potentially having an affair. It's not believable. And Sarah says it never happened. And the woman says it never happened.
I've got all the dates. In November of 2002, they come to me, the couple, apologetic.
And by the way, that is a Mikeism. I got the dates. I've written it down. It's in my journal.
We're so sorry. Sarah calls me laughing on the phone. I noted in my journal, I've got all the dates. In November of 2002, they come to me, the couple, apologetic. We're so sorry.
Never happened. Never. I mean, it's believable. You hear him say it that way, but according to the woman, never apologized, never came back, and did not believe Sarah. And she was right. Sarah will admit at this point that she was lying. That I believe she was given a heads up by Mike that they would be calling, and she says that she lied for Mike, and the woman, whose name we're not mentioning, said she knew she was lying. So why would she go back and apologize when she knew that Sarah was lying? Well, finish the clip real quick.
Sorry. Sarah calls me laughing on the phone. I noted in my journal, flabbergasted, like, what are they talking about? And I didn't coach her, tell her, don't say anything, because I knew there's nothing to say. The worst she's going to say is, he was a little too friendly, but that's it.
Yeah. So
it's weird that he says, I knew that the worst she was going to say is he was a little too friendly, but actually this whole thing is happening because of the stuff that she says. If all she said was he was too friendly, none of this would have happened. It was the whole thing that triggered it was Sarah going, all right, I'm gonna share what happened. And then him minimizing it and in some cases denying things that look like they happened. But I think what the message, this particular lie that we're talking about now, pulls together the fact that there is witness after witness after witness after witness who is saying, no, that's not what happened. These different witnesses, their stories are consistent with each other. Mm-hmm. Mike stands alone. Now, in the interview with Heather, he talks and laments that all of a sudden, or maybe it was in my private call with him, I'm getting the two mixed up, but all of a sudden everyone has a perfect memory. I think it was my private call because everyone has a perfect memory. And I said, no, everybody doesn't have perfect memories. It's just that they all consistently keep telling the same story that disagrees with you. This is one witness against many. This is the biblical standard for establishing things that we should believe is multiple witnesses.
All right, let's go ahead and continue. I'm going to play a clip here, and then we're going to see if it's true.
And, for people who say, well, who's the real Mike Brown? Who's the real Dr. Brown? Mm-hmm. I didn't publish any book in that season, 2001. There's early 2002. There's not a single article I wrote then. In other words, it's not like people look at it, they throw your whole ministry into question, basically want to cancel everything you've done. But the person that I said earlier, the one you heard preaching, teaching, that's the real me.
Yeah, that's that's just a weird statement.
I'm trying to figure out, what is he's worried here about people who want to cancel everything he's ever done, because I don't want to do that. If you've been ministered to, if you've been ministered to by Mike Brown, hold on to that and rejoice in that. Thank God for that. And I'm glad that he was there ministering to you in those ways. That's wonderful. His work on answering Jewish objections to Jesus is still going to be something, because I don't know what to replace it with. So I'm still going to be like, I feel like I still want to reference this, as a good resource. I can't recommend it the same way I could have before. I can't just be like, hey, here you go, because I'm like, oh, this is now attached to a person who is ongoingly denying and manipulating a part of a cover-up culture. But we don't need to undo everything he's ever done. That's an exaggeration to try to straw man what's really going on.
What you don't get to do is to say, this is the real me. Other people judge who the real you is. And who the real you is. I don't know if that's good English, but I know that my wife knows the realer me than most people who hear me preach. Preaching is probably the thing I do best in this world. It's a gift from God. I didn't train myself. God gave me a gift to be able to hopefully exposit his word and preach the word and teach the word and build people up. But I'm doing the thing that he's gifted me to do. The real me is, if I lose my temper, or if I, so to hear somebody say the real me is the one preaching is a strange, most people say the opposite, but that's not the lie here, because that's subjective. There is a lie here. And the lie here is
he says he didn't write anything. Yeah, I didn't write anything during that time, no articles and no publishing of books.
Yeah, and as folks can see on the screen, he did write a book. It is called Revolution in the Church, Challenging Religious Systems with a Call for Radical Change. So let's just look at the timeline. So Mike is saying that in that timeline, 2001, 2002, he did not write a book. But this book was published specifically, the date that is on Amazon.com is July 2002, which means it would have been written over that exact period, 2001, early part of 2002, in order to be published in 2002, probably being finished right at the end of 2001. And we know that it was written after 2001 had already, in other words, he could have said, well, I actually wrote it in 99, but because of the Revolution book, I waited. It was like the part 2. The problem is in the preface, it says this: on February 14th, 2001, in the leadership team for Fire School of Ministry in Pensacola, Florida, was meeting with Derek Brown, a dear fellow worker from England. As we were talking with Derek about our vision to see the Jesus revolution make an impact on our society, he made a simple but profound comment. Before there can be revolution in society, there must be revolution in the church. In other words, I got the idea to write this book when Derek Brown made that comment, which was February 14th, 2001. That means at the very time that Mike is saying he was at the lowest point in his life, that it was a hellish financial burden, that he was making bad judgments. At the time that he said, I did not write a book, he wrote a book.
After this, I dug a little bit more and found on Dr. Brown's website, thelineoffire.org, that it records a list of his published works. In 2001, it records the Revival Answer book. In 2002, Revolution in the Church, which was the July 1st, 2002 book. And also in 2003, on March 1st, he published Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus, Volume 3. The previous volume was published in 2000. All of this makes it very difficult to believe that he was not writing at the time.
And again, this is a minor, this is not nobody's dying over this lie. It's just another in a pattern of his defense is, look, I was so hurting and I was so broken during that time that I didn't, and I write book, he writes probably a book every year. And he's like, did I write a book? No, except he did write a book during that time. And if there's an explanation, Mike, we would certainly love to hear it. But according to the book, it was published on July 1st, 2002. His book, Revolution, came out on January 1st, 2000. So it would have been during that time, it seems. Mike, before we head in to the next point, I just want to say something about this whole issue, because And I know we've touched on this. It could come across a little petty. Why are you still talking about this? It just seems that God is doing something. And I've been meditating quite a bit on what is happening. I think a big part of it is New Testament eldership is not doing its job. So you have all these different figures, and I could mention a bunch of different names right now that are in the media, where people are saying, "Hey, you did something wrong, unethical, maybe criminal, maybe immoral," and so often these individuals are submitted, accountable to a 501c3 board. And we don't see that in Scripture. We don't see, Paul saying to Timothy, now, if there are accusations, make sure to go to the board, which are typically friends of the principal, or his family members sometimes. And I think that God is wanting to re-energize New Testament eldership. So in the situation that we're talking about right now with Dr. Brown, he was at one time, he was the apostolic leader or the senior leader of the FIRE movement. But by the time all this came to light, he was not even attending, from what I understand, on a regular basis their local church, or was in any type of submitted relationship to the leadership. And the problem is that the grace to govern these issues, to speak into these issues, is not with the 501c3 board. The average 501c3 board is not thinking, okay, we might have to deal with sexual immorality next month. But in New Testament eldership, that is thing, 1 Corinthians 5. Those are the types of things that God has given grace and empowerment to New Testament eldership. So in so many of these cases, the ones that you're investigating right now, you're dealing with boards and not with elders. So,
I've tried to get a hold of churches too for situations, and sadly, in many of the situations we're talking about, the churches will not speak with me, so that I could say, won't have a phone conversation, and not so I can make a video, just to talk. I just say, hey, can we just talk? I don't need to make a video about what you say to me. I have things that I want to bring to you for you to hold accountable this person that is at your church. And I rarely do this, but there's times where I've done it and I can't. I called Steve Berger, who is the guy that was harassing TC Cannon years and years later, and all this weird stuff. And I interviewed her, and we played the clip where he publicly put her on blast. It's still on their YouTube channel. I reached out to the church 3 different ways. Please, can I just talk to somebody there about this? This is a problem. Okay, and you guys still have the video where he's doing this. It's still up. It shouldn't be. And nobody will even talk to me.
Well, that would be this.
This is a failure of their eldership in their local church. It's some kind of weird protection of the elite. Don't even listen, even when there's evidence that can be presented. So that you're right. This goes on, and it's even worse with the 501c3, because when you have these ministries, churches are 501c3 too, but what I mean is when you have these ministries that, like mine, are these parachurch ministries that are multimedia focused, which mine is. It is so hard for board members to hold me accountable in the way that my local church can. Mm-hmm. So I'm submitted to my local church. I've gone to my elders. I am submitted to you. I want you to know. I want you to hold me accountable. If you see me do something publicly that you think is out of line, you can come and confront me on that, and I'm going to listen. I had that conversation with several of the elders just so they know that that window's open. But you know what? These knuckleheads we're dealing with are never going to have those conversations with their elders. They're going to surround themselves with yes men. And when that happens, and you can't get through the proper channels, you have to just go public. When it's a situation that requires it, you just have to go public because there's no other option, and that's what's happening in a lot of these cases. Yeah.
Okay, so intermission over. Let's continue with our list here. So now I want to talk about a fellow by the name of M.R. That's not his name. And he was connected with the FIRE movement at some point. So he knew Mike Brown, and he had heard some of these rumors, I think from a couple different students at FIRE school, and he was concerned. And so in February 2024, he emailed Mike Brown, and he said, Mike, and it was primarily centered around the situation with Sarah, the hand-holding incident in the car, and then a meeting between Chris Bennett and Mike Brown that happened in 2020. And I know we've talked about this, but I just want to refresh everyone's memory. Chris Bennett was the young man who was in a car in 2002 that witnessed Mike Brown grabbing the hand of Sarah Monk, holding it for several minutes, as many as 15, as little as 4 or 5, depending on who we believe. And then he saw them in a full frontal embrace that same evening when he was taking books out of the car. So as he gets older, his conscience is bothering him, and he's now a 40-year-old man, and he has daughters, and he's just thinking that's not right. So he gets a hold of Sarah Monk, and see if she could shed any light on the situation. Okay, so that's all I'll say right now. But this gentleman, M.R., he knew that there was this meeting between Chris Keith and Mike Brown in 2020. So that would have been just over 5 years ago. And he also knew about the hand-holding incident. So let's start there. So he calls Mike, he emails Mike, and he says, he lays out what he knows, and he's very gentle and very nice. And Mike responds with this: "Thanks for reaching out. I really appreciate it. I'm sitting here with a big smile. Since what you've heard is incredibly far from the truth, I'll give you a call in a few minutes. Very glad to talk. I'm so glad you came to me." So, sitting with if there was no truth to it, then I could understand why he might be smiling. Of course, I would be terrified if you were talking about me in those situations came up. So he tells him he's got this big smile, and they're going to have this conversation. So in the original actual email that he sent Mike, it was clearly a mixed bag. It was not all true. But the way Mike responds to it is like it's not that big of a deal.
I think this is a really good example of the kind of thing that happens a lot with this whole situation that Dr. Brown does. And that is, there was some stuff that wasn't true in the email, some stuff that was true in the email, but the way that he responded was as though it was a nothing burger.
The whole thing's nothing ever happened.
And that part is, I'm smiling and all this. That part is, he's putting up a front here. The reality is not that. The reality is that this was significant. This is important. That's what the investigation concluded, that they said they would submit to and did not. That's certainly what multiple witnesses have reported. So this habit of, I'll grab onto, whatever I can to spin into a conclusion that ultimately isn't accurate.
So Mike, they talk on the phone, and M.R. records the phone call, which was legal in the state of North Carolina. It's a one-party consent. So let's just go ahead and listen. You can listen to the whole phone call online. It's in the report, but we'll listen to just a few clips.
Anyway, so we're coming back from Alabama after having preached there, and he and a bunch of other grads came around. I don't know, we had maybe 7, 8 people in the van, and we were sitting in the back, and I grabbed her hand. I said, this is in front of everybody. I said, she's like a daughter to me, and I grabbed her hand. So that's the scandal. So it was stupid. In retrospect, it was absolutely stupid to do it because she wasn't my daughter.
Now, what's interesting about that, Mike, is that he says that's the scandal. It's always, let's downplay it. That's the scandal.
Right. That's not the scandal.
It's not the scandal. And in the interview with Heather Schott, he says the scandal is that he touched her butt.
The very worst thing, and this is like the infamous scandal, this is the thing. A few times when she walked away from my desk, I gave her a backhanded swat on her behind. And this is amazing to have to tell the whole world this.
But he doesn't mention that to M.R. because M.R. doesn't know about that. So, he's minimizing. And the facts of what he shared based on what we know now are not the real facts. So in that, he says that he was in a van. They were not in a van, that they were sitting in the back of a van. No, he was actually driving his own Jeep Cherokee. And there were not 7 or 8 people. And I imagine he says there's 7 or 8 people because it makes it look, the more people, it was innocent, no big deal. I just grabbed her hand. But he didn't grab her hand. He actually held her hand. There's a difference between that. Technically, to hold someone's hand, you would have to grab it. But it makes it seem like he grabbed it, let it go, when in fact, by all accounts, he held it from anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes. And to be clear, that was without her consent.
This is huge. This is huge because it has to do with the pattern of spin, damage control. This is the culture of cover-up. When you're seeing behind the scenes that depending on who you talk to, the conversation is different. How much do you know? That's how much I will have to spin. Mm-hmm. Whatever you don't know doesn't exist. And that has been the consistent pattern. It's dishonest.
Yeah, and if we knew nothing else other than this one thing, just imagine this. A 46-year-old, bigger-than-life leader of a revival movement, now fire school, fire church, just out of the blue, without consent, without warning, takes your hand in front of other people and holds it for 5 to 15 minutes. I can imagine what's going through Sarah's mind, how strange this must have been for her.
Yeah.
But again, the whole way it's explained is not the way it happened. So let's continue.
Like we would, she'd grab me and give me a hug, I do, but it's always around other people.
So again, this idea that we heard shared over and over again in this phone call, in the Heather shot, it's always around other people, always around other people. But it wasn't always around other people. As we've already stated, when Chris got back to the office that day and was unloading books, he sees the two of them alone in a full frontal embrace. That this is a married man, 46-year-old and 20-year-old staffer, hugging each other, presumably alone. And then there's another very troubling story that has corroboration, which was in New York City. And again, it's so uncomfortable talking about. I wish, I would so much rather he talk about this and just be honest about it. I hate that we have to do this, but they're in New York City. His wife is driving the car. He's in the passenger seat, and there's 4 staffers in the back seat. And it's a ministry trip. Sarah is pushed up against the right door in the back. Mike is in the passenger seat, and suddenly she feels her pant leg being tugged upon, and it's Mike reaching back behind the seat, tugging on her pant leg. So she grabs his hand. By this time, they've held hands on many occasions, and according to Sarah, the only time it was public, the only time was in that car. Every other time, which he said was many times, was private. And then the two of them hold hands while they're driving, while his wife is driving around New York City, and there's 6 people in the car. And what they did not know at the time is that the young lady sitting next to Sarah saw it. They thought they were hiding it. And by the way, when you do things like this, you lose your sound judgment. And it was not sound judgment to hold her hand like that. But this other young lady whom I've talked to, who has told me her testimony, she said, I looked down, I saw them holding hands. And so it wasn't always in private. And again, Mike's own words to Heather Schott, quote, her office was not far from mine. She would come over, give me a big hug. That's not public. That's private.
Right. And I want to acknowledge one other small thing, but it's an important thing. It's the deflection of she would hug me. In his description of what happened, she hugged me. It's her. She's the initiator. This is pretty common for the times that I've seen him interact on this stuff. Unless you know that he initiated things, he'll speak as though someone else did. And that was also the way he dealt with the letters in the desk and the correspondence with that woman. He initially made it sound to some witnesses as though it was her initiating it with him, and he was just responding somehow,
Right. And we're going to see that in a text message that he sent to a pastor in December of 2024 after this became public. And it's a similar thing, but I won't share it now. So continuing on in their phone conversation.
Keith and another guy came to me and said, was there anything going on with you and her? Anything ever happened? I said, what are you talking about? I said, what you saw was what happened. It was always in front of people.
Yeah.
Just that. And so they did an investigation. They called her. She was laughing, like, what are you talking about?
So we already talked about this earlier in one of the earlier points, but he's referring to Keith Collins and Nils Pripp. Nils got fired for that conversation because he did not believe sufficiently enough. But again, it's that same thing. What you saw is what happened because everything was done in public, except meeting in a car alone at night. Many nights, according to Sarah, is another example of not in public. And we won't continue with that one since we already talked about it.
A grad in North Carolina a few years ago, it struck him as his kids were getting older, like, well, that was just wrong. She was, was in the van with us. He reached out to her, and she went over, everything that happened, told him nothing sexual, romantic. Here is the nature of this and that, etc.
Okay, this is one of the more egregious misdirections. Again, there's truth to it, but it's not the truth. So he's referring to Chris Bennett. We talked about that earlier. Chris Bennett was in the car, so I'm holding hands. 18 years later, it's bothering him. So he contacts Sarah, and the way Mike just explained it right there is that Sarah set him straight. Nothing sexual, nothing romantic, except that's not what she said. And I want to go through her some of these text messages. Okay, so in the first text message, again, what Mike is saying is that she set him straight regarding the relationship. And you will hear Mike say in the Heather Schott interview, in almost every interview he's done, is that Sarah said nothing sexual or romantic took place. That is not true. Sarah did say that it was not sexual, meaning they were not in a bed, but certainly there were certain things that were sexual, touching one's rear end, etc. But she never said that it wasn't romantic. And Mike repeats that over and over and over again. All these text messages are public. They're on the internet. And you go see if you can find any place that Sarah says that they were not romantic. So let's just read through this first text. Hey, Chris, it's been a long time. The relationship we had between her and Dr. Brown, at first I felt as a father-daughter, but that was not how it ended. Nothing sexual happened, but it was not what a married man and a single female should ever have. So no, this is not her setting Chris straight that nothing happened. Right. She says, I left on my own accord, and I've had no contact in about 11 or 12 years. I did not want to be there any longer, and I had to leave. I knew I had to leave. Mr. Cava, who's one of the leaders, called me up after I left and asked me questions along with the other woman that we talked about earlier who she supposedly never laughed. Skipping down a little bit. I let others know that there was an inappropriate relationship that occurred and I decided to leave, but never said with who. In other words, she protected Dr. Brown. She made it seem like it was with a student. I know that because she's told me privately. You and I were friends during our time in Pensacola, so I feel I owe you the entire truth. It is hard. Now, by the way, for all these people who are calling her a false victim, you have to understand, Sarah, at the time she wrote this in 2020, she wasn't running around saying she was a victim. She blamed herself. And she has never once said that she had no fault. I would say that. I don't think she had any fault. But this is what she says. It is hard to think about this because I feel betrayed, but also shameful. I know I was wrong. I left God after I left, and over the years, I've tried to come back. So in that first text message, it's pretty clear that she is not saying nothing to see here. She's saying it wrecked my life. I left there broken, backslidden, and what we had started off as father-daughter, but it ended up in something that a married man should never have with a single female.
Here's the thing. Often where I think the lie is in the conversations I've had and heard from Michael Brown on this particular topic is not just in the words that are said, but in the belief that is created in the mind of the person hearing him. And so, yeah, okay, you could go back and try to argue that those words, in some cases, they're obviously total lies. Other times, it's like, technically, you can defend what you said, the words you said, but you can't defend the belief you created in the mind of the person. Right. And that's where it's misleading. It's like, okay, yeah, you made them believe something that wasn't true. And you could be like, well, it wasn't romantic. Let's argue about the meaning of the word romantic. But the belief you created. Yeah,
just to be clear, there's nowhere in those texts where she says it wasn't romantic. She says it wasn't sexual.
Right. No, I'm just saying Michael Brown could argue about the definition of the word romantic, and we could spend an hour doing that. Instead,
or sexual.
Let's ask about the belief that was created in the mind of the person he's on the phone with. That guy's now believing something that's not true. because of the words you used.
Exactly. And why not say, hey, let me send these text messages to you, and you can read them in their entirety, rather than give you this idea that Sarah was setting him straight, that nothing happened. Because as you're going to see, Mike, nothing could be further from the truth. So she goes on to say, can I say I honestly cannot believe I'm telling you this? This has been my secret for almost 20 years. So she's told nobody. Everybody who's asked her about this, she, by her own admission, has lied about it to protect Mike. Also understanding that, who's going to believe her over him. So continuing, and folks, these will be on your screen. When I read your message, I took a deep breath. This is Sarah talking to Chris. I took a deep breath and thought I would tell you the same story that I told others. But for whatever reason, I decided it had been long enough. I really hope this helps you, Chris, with whatever you are dealing with, and you can move forward stronger. So what we're seeing here is that she is telling a story that she has not told in 18 years. She's telling the truth about what happened to her. So when Mike says, he wrote to my leadership back in November, she's a demonstrably false witness whose story just constantly changing. That is not true. She told one story early on, which she admits she was lying about. And then in 22, when Chris came to her and said, was there more to that? She says, I can't believe I'm going to tell you, but I'm finally going to tell the truth. In the next text, Chris asked her point blank, he says, did you guys have other inappropriate contact besides the hands, holding hands? And she responds, he did, I never did. And that's interesting because, as you noted, Mike, it's constantly, she was affectionate with me. I was responding to her affection. Not true. And as we stated earlier, he has admitted to touching her butt, which obviously could not have been her being the aggressor. He's admitted to kissing her forehead, and there's no way that she could have been the aggressor in that. So she writes back, he did, I never did. He would hit my butt as I would walk by, but that was it. He would kiss the top of my head at first, then it was my cheek. In the next text, and we're jumping through these, but I'm just showing you her narrative in 2020, the first time she's telling anyone. So it made me feel uncomfortable when he would hold my hand. But my dad was never affectionate, so I thought, well, okay. Then I soon realized it was wrong and not what it should be. About 2 months after I left, and she goes back to the phone call with John Cava, Mr. Cava called and asked if we had an inappropriate relationship or something along that lines. And I lied. I said no, meaning, yes, we did have an inappropriate relationship, but I didn't tell him. So what Mike is...
And she knew it at the time. This is important as far as the memory reconstruction garbage, that she knew at the time she was lying. She didn't say, I later realized it was inappropriate. She knew when she was asked. She was coming to understand that, particularly after she found the notes in Mike's nightstand about his relationship with Kim. But that was 20 something years ago. This was not something that happened when you got a hold of her or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So so she said no, that it was not inappropriate, and she said she lied. Mike called me and let me know that he would be calling and asking questions. Now, why would you let her know? Why would you feel the need to let her know if it was, at the worst, it was overly friendly? I can't remember from something else that we're quoting where he said that the only thing she could have said, I was overly friendly. But he felt the need to warn her that John Cava was calling. I had thought I needed to tell someone while I was there, but it would have been my word against his. I didn't feel anyone would believe me. He covered everything up with Kim. No one knew, so who would say he couldn't make them believe his word over hers? Chris, you saw what you saw, and you knew it was not right. You did the right thing with going to another leader. Going to another leader. I'm sorry that you were not believed. And so this is referring to Chris going to Keith Collins, and then Keith and Nils go to Mike. And I don't know if we mentioned it earlier, but then Mike goes back to Chris and gently, but rebukes him for not using Matthew 18. And I'll say it again. When we're talking about a leader potentially being involved in sexual sin, it's not Matthew 18. It's 1 Timothy 5:19, where accusations are brought to elders. But the point that I want to make here, we have one more text, is that he's trying to get M.R. to believe that these text messages were meant to say, no, Chris, you're wrong. Nothing happened. He takes one little sentence out of there, adds a word, romantic. She said nothing sexual, nothing romantic ever happened. She never says nothing romantic ever happened. In fact, she implies that something romantic happening. And he is trying to create in the mind of M.R. that Sarah and Mike are together in that nothing happened, when that is not the truth.
Right. Although she was with him previously, but she was lying.
Yes.
And now she's telling the truth, and that's what's changed. What's changed is she's now openly telling the truth about it. Yeah.
Yes. And then final thing I read, she said, Chris, I know for a fact that he had another inappropriate relationship with a woman at Brownsville. This is about when I started realizing I had to leave. So she finds the notes in the desk, and she confronts him and realizes that this is not a healthy place for me. This is when I realized started realizing I had to leave. I did confront him and showed him the notes I found at his house while I was house sitting for him. He admitted it, and I had a talk with him and Nancy, his wife. They said I was basically representing the entire student body and asked for forgiveness. I said okay and never spoke of it to anyone. There was nothing in the journal about a sexual affair, more them talking and fantasizing about it. So Mike is trying to get M.R. to believe that Sarah's defending him, when in fact nothing could be further from the truth. She actually exposes him in both his actions towards her and this other issue with a woman that we now know as Kim.
This is the same meeting that he denies happened, right? Where she was being asked, "Forgive me on behalf of the student body." He says that never happened. They never requested that. They never asked for that.
Well, it depends what meeting. So when Chris confronts him later on in 2020, he just says he can't recall. He doesn't recall a meeting like that, and that doesn't really. Anybody knows Dr. Michael Brown knows that he has a memory like steel. Things are never fuzzy. But in later, when others brought this to me, he said it never happened.
Yeah, I've seen him adamantly deny it.
Yeah, and here's at the end of the day, he has lied to me.
Yeah, well, me too.
We started this program with point number 1, where he said to me that the charges were false, and I within 2 or 3 days I realized they weren't false. So Sarah has never lied to me. I have no reason not to believe her. And why would she make this up? There's nothing to be gained by having this story out.
Not only is it strange to make up, it sounds real. The thing is, the story has the ring of truth to it. Okay, yes, you are obviously dealing with a situation which the next rational moral step is to tell people, where you go, hey, I need to be held accountable for this. And so you have her here, she already knows, to silence this moment. Will you forgive me on behalf of all the people I don't want to know about this? It's just like a total move that would happen in a cover-up environment. That's exactly what would happen.
Yeah, and this is months before when Nils Pripp did not sufficiently believe Mike, that Mike and Nancy called him up that night and said, "You're trying to bring down the ministry." So it does seem that a lot of effort is being used to protect the ministry, rather than to fully come clean over what happened. Okay, so the phone call continues.
He said, "Hey, it ends here," walked out.
Okay, so he's talking about his meeting with Chris. He's telling M.R. About his meeting with Chris Bennett. And at the end of his meeting with Chris Bennett, he's saying that Chris was satisfied. Hey, the text messages show that Sarah had no issue. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't sexual. And I'm sorry, what was the word? It ends here. That first of all, that's not what Chris said. Let me read to you from the Firefly report. Chris grew increasingly frustrated by Brown's vague, evasive answers. Toward the end of the meeting, Brown asked if Chris was satisfied. Chris responded, "No, because you don't remember anything." Unsure of what to do next, Chris told both Brown and Keith, quote, "I wash my hands of it." Now, that is very different than "it ends here like I'm satisfied." It's
so misleading, because this is a perfect example of what I mean. He could argue all day long. Well, he washed his hands of it, so he was done with it, so it ended there. He could argue for that all he wants, but everybody listening knows you lied. Okay, you used words to manipulate the way somebody was thinking to give them a wrong belief. "It ends here" implies it ended, resolved, because there was nothing to worry about in the end once the truth came out. And the reality is it was the opposite. He was only more convinced that something wrong had happened after this call. I've actually talked to Chris when I was first looking into this months ago. Me and him just on our own, we had a whole conversation, and yeah, he was shocked to find out that Mike represented it as though him and Chris were on good terms over these issues.
And by the way, what the quote that Mike gave was, "It ends here, like I'm satisfied, but I wash my hands of it," was a non-leader saying to a leader, "I've done everything I can do." 18 years ago, I confronted this. Now I'm confronting it again. You don't remember anything. And he says I wasn't satisfied, whereas Mike portrays him to MR as being satisfied. And okay, let's continue.
And because I've so tried to set a godly example, I actually broke down crying. I said, "Man, I'm sorry to let you down," because it hurt him.
So Mike is concerned now about Chris. Chris is hurt, and Mike begins to cry, and because he tried to set an example, and I asked Chris for a response to that, and this is Chris's verbatim response, quote, "As for meeting with Mike Brown, at one point he did start to apologize with a few tears, but I cut him off. And I told him that the entire student body, missionaries, etc., needed to hear the conversation we were having. As soon as I stopped him, the tears stopped. It was not a long apology with tears and weeping or whatever. It was short, and it had no effect on me because I was thinking about the students in the sin. After knowing the full story from Ray, I see that he was only apologizing for the things he was confronted with." So Chris is saying, no, I was not this wounded guy coming and he cries and he's feeling about me. Chris stopped him. He said, "Stop crying. This is a conversation that needs to come to light. You led a movement. And everyone else needs to know about it. But I can tell you, as someone who spoke to Mike, the last time in late October, he did not want this to ever become public. But as you can see, a lot of people knew about it. Chris actually took notes of the meeting with Mike Brown immediately, sent them to Sarah the next day. And he's telling Sarah, Mike admitted to all these things. So I contact Mike in October, and he says, these are false allegations. But when Chris confronted him with evidence in 2020, 5 years ago, he admitted to everything. And some things he could not remember, which was, again, why Chris wasn't satisfied. So I know you've heard a lot about Walmart, but just one more clip on that.
Because this was, like I said, in public.
Yep.
Like if I ran into her at a Walmart, I put my arm around her. But it was like intentionally in front of everyone. That's, so that was the foolish thing. Like,
yeah,
it can look bad. It's not good judgment. So that was just kind of the burnout after the split.
For sure.
That's what grieves me the most. Like, that was just a stupid thing to do. It doesn't look right. But I stupidly made sure that anything like that was around other people.
So MR doesn't know any of the backstory. So, he's learning from Mike. So Mike, now we know, we've watched the Heather Shot interview where he says that he would meet her at Walmart. It was scheduled. He may have said it was her idea. We know from Sarah it was his idea. And we know that they would sit alone in a parked car on a regular basis. But he's telling MR, quote, "If I ran into her at Walmart." That is not what happened. You made plans to meet her at Walmart. But then he says, if I planned to meet her, if I ran into her at Walmart, I put my arm around her. So, all very strange.
Yeah, this is the fact that he brings up Walmart as the example off the top of his head. Some will think I'm going out on a limb here. I think it's pretty obvious that this is most likely coming from the fact that there were Walmart incidents he was aware of, and he was trying to minimize those. And so he grabs that as the example. But yeah, everything about it was false. You didn't run into each other. You didn't just put your arm around her. You didn't do it actually in public. You did it in a parking lot, which is not what we all call public. This is not what we mean. When you say public, you mean around people who know you, right, not strangers. If I go do something fishy in a bar with some woman, I could say it's in public, but if nobody knows me there, it's not really.
Hey everybody, Ron Cantor jumping in real quick here. We had left out a clip, and Mike and I felt that it was very pertinent, so I just want to play it for you real quick. This is Dr. Brown talking to MR, but he's talking about his meeting with Chris Bennett when Chris asked about why these things were not disclosed to other leaders. So let's go ahead and hear that.
And he said, yeah, but you should have talked to all the leaders back then. I said, well, I talked to the guys, my closest friend, my pastor.
I can't make exactly out what Dr. Brown is saying there, but it seems like he's saying that he did disclose this to the guys, and the guys would be the other elders, Josh Peters, Bob Gladstone, Keith Collins, John Cava, and others. And then he said he disclosed it to his pastor, his closest friend. I believe I know who he's talking about, and I'm not going to say his name, but that gentleman was not the pastor at the time. In fact, Mike was the pastor. Mike was the senior leader. The person he's referring to is the one that was sworn to silence, and that was his assistant at the time. When they moved to Charlotte, he became the pastor, and very effective one. But at the time, he was not an elder. He was not in that in that realm of leadership by his own admission. So for Mike to portray this now 20-something years later to MR as if this fellow was his pastor is not accurate because of two reasons. Number one, this gentleman only later would become the pastor of Fire, but even then, that was within an apostolic network, and Mike was the senior leader of that network. So I don't think he, again, I could be wrong here, and Dr. Brown can correct the record, but as far as I understand, that gentleman, good guy, wonderful man, was never Mike Brown's pastor. In addition, this was never disclosed to the guys, the elders. That is the issue. That is the very issue that I brought up with Mike back in October, is that you should have shared this with the elders, and he did not. And again, he's telling MR this in 2024, but he told Heather Schott in 2025 why he did not tell the elders. So he is now admitting publicly that he did not tell the guys, but MR, who had no way really of investigating and finding out, it was a very quick way to, again, in my opinion, to end this. Yeah, I told the elders, I told the guys, I told my pastor, my closest friend, but none of that is true. So, that's more or less his phone call with MR. And again, you can listen to the whole thing in the online, brownwitnessreport.com. It's just so, when I heard that, it was just stunning to me, having known now, investigated and read the investigation. And he was dishonest. He was dishonest with this gentleman.
Very much. Dishonest with, that's the consistent pattern.
Continuing, and again, what we're doing here is detailing, for lack of a better word, lies, falsehoods that were told in order, Mike, you keep mentioning this culture of cover-up. So in December, this is Pastor Matt, not his real name, but he is a megachurch pastor somewhere in the United States. So at that time, Mike was reaching out to a lot of different people through voice text, through text messages, email, phone calls, and he was pleading his case. He was telling his story, his narrative. And so one of those, Pastor Matt, sent me the text message that Mike sent him. And in it are several, there's just no other word, lies. So Mike, and this is written in mid-December. This is after Mike had just published a video where he talked about his relationship with Kim and referred to it as an emotional tie. He referred to it to me as a sinful, an unhealthy and sinful soul tie. And so he makes this video, which most people who saw it were very confused by it because it was meant to be very transparent, for the sake of full disclosure, and it was hard to really know what he was saying. Here's the text message. I can only respond privately, not publicly. But I 100% reject the details of Sarah's account, the kissing on the lips most specifically. And her story changed dramatically from 4.5 years ago when she shared everything with a grad, and that account of hers mirrors mine. Let's stop right there. So he says that Sarah's story from 4.5 years ago matched his story. Now, we just read that. Those were the text messages that we just read, where she described being hit on the butt, kissed on the forehead, on the cheek, where she talks about the fact that Mike and Nancy sat her down and had her forgive Mike for his indiscretions with Kim, which was an erotic verbal phone and text message relationship. And she was some sort of representative forgiveness. And so that's what she details in that. And so Mike is saying that her story has dramatically changed in the past 4.5 years. And I can tell you that the story she told me in late October 2024, it matched exactly what she told Chris in those text messages. There was only one detail that was different. And that was when she said that he would kiss her on the lips. One day, she walked into his office. Her habit was to say goodbye to Mike at the end of the day. They worked together in the same office. She would come into his office and give him a hug, and then she would go home. And this time, she walks into his office. He's sitting down, and she goes over to hug him. And she said he puckers his lips. And so they kissed, a peck. And then that became the tradition. In addition to a hug, there was a peck at the end of the day. And also when she would leave his car in those Walmart rendezvous. That is the only thing that has changed. So when he says her story changed dramatically from 4.5 years ago, that is a lie. It did not change dramatically at all. Only one detail.
I want to add, this is something he also said to me. This was part of the basis of why I started digging into this more, because he pulls me aside at the ETS and he was like, yeah, she's totally changed. Her recollection is totally different now. She's remembering things she didn't even remember before. And then that led to the false claims about getting memory reconstruction therapy. And this, to me, that this is very egregious, because what you're doing is you're grabbing influential leaders like this megachurch pastor or me. I'm influential. And some people like that, and some people hate that. I find it very intimidating, but I want to be faithful with it. And you're lying to us so that you can lie to the masses. This is a massive cover-up when you start involving all these different players to try to tell your story. And he did this with Mercy Culture when he went on their podcast, and they participated. Yes. And they're culpable because there's tons of evidence that they ignored when they brought him on. They're not just being lied to; they're participating in the lie at this stage. There's something seriously wrong with Mercy Culture and the leadership there to do this, and then reject everybody who has gone to them and said, please stop, please look at the evidence, look at all the witness testimonies. And they reject it all because of their spiritual elitism and their pride. I'm just going to call it like it is. It's dangerous, and I guarantee you there is a world of issues over there that are not yet dealt with. But yeah, that's the level of, it's not just, in text he said something that wasn't true. You have to see it as part of the story.
It's a strategy. This is a goal to reach influential people, to get them to spread a narrative. And then, there is the text message with Joel Richardson, where Mike reaches out to Joel Richardson, a well-known author on end times. And he is concerned, it appears, because Joel, who doesn't hold back, had said some things online about this. And he's reaching out to Joel privately in a text message, trying to get him to take down, what he has written. And Joel did not respond as he anticipated. So again, it is a campaign of dishonesty to spread a false narrative. And so he goes on here and he says, Nancy, his wife, has been furious to read these new accounts, but there are no new accounts. The account of 2020 is identical to the account of 2024, with the exception of one detail. And you say, well, why would she say that now? Why would she say now that he's kissing her on the lips and she didn't say it? Listen, understand. She has not told anybody this for 18 years. It's been her secret. And I have interviewed survivors of clergy sexual abuse, and most of them will go decades, longer than Tammy Woods, 40 years, before she understood that she was a victim and began to speak out about it. So this is very normal behavior. Imagine going to a swimming pool and you're debating whether or not to jump into that pool. And so what do? You do what everybody does. You put your foot in the water and you see how cold it is. So when she shared with Chris Bennett in 2020, she left out the most egregious and probably the most embarrassing thing. Just the idea of...
Let me add into this, because I'm no longer certified because I haven't kept my certification up, but I was for years a certified domestic violence counselor. I was working with the state. I had guys who were convicted of committing DV, domestic violence, and they would sit in on classes for 52 weeks with me. One of the things that you'll see in training as you're dealing with domestic violence, as is a well-known fact, anytime someone talks about abuse that they have experienced, they usually understate it. So if a woman comes to you, usually it's women, comes to you and says, this is what happened, ... You are trained to assume there was more that she's not ready to talk about yet. That is the normal thing you're taught to assume, and you're taught to assume it because people have worked with so many victims. They learn this the same as you have, that this is industry, this is just known. Yes, she didn't share everything, and they usually don't. Anytime a woman tells me he hit me, I'm thinking there's probably a lot more to it than just that, and it just takes time, and sometimes they never share. That's very common. Even when they do share a bunch, they hold back this other thing because it's just so embarrassing and so debasing or just hard. And so that's totally normal. This isn't fabricating anything.
Would you agree then that the fact that she only left out one detail is surprising? Like normally you would expect her to leave out more details.
You would have. I think that had to do with where she was at 20 years later. This was almost 20 years later. So when she talked to Chris, that she had a lot of time to build up, and then she had all this time after he asked before she responded. So I think it's surprising that she shared as much as she did at that moment. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple more things in this text. He says to Pastor Matt, I have wanted to do this video since September 13th when I first learned that people and the Roys report were gunning for me. This is what I've wanted to say for months now, with my board agreeing that the time was the time. I'm sorry. This is what I've wanted to say for months now, with my board agreeing that the time was now right. The problem with that is he told me the exact opposite. So he's talking about making the video. And again, the video's been taken down, so it couldn't have been that great. But in that video, he's trying, without getting too much into detail, to explain that, yes, he had an emotional affair, adultery of the heart, as he explains it to the investigator, with Kim. And when I met with Mike, or via email, 6 weeks before that, his words to me were the exact opposite of that. When I urged him, I said, Mike, this is not nothing. This is something. It's not the worst thing in the world. And I told him, I don't think it's a career-ending sin, but you didn't handle it right. You should have handled it with a group of elders, with a group of leaders. And I said, the best thing you can do now is to get it out in the light. And he said to me, the only thing that could even be considered abuse is what he did to Sarah. The other issue, meaning the relationship with Kim, we will not talk about it. He was adamant that nobody needs to know. And I understand why. That is the more embarrassing one. That was the more overtly sexual relationship, even if it wasn't physical. But he's telling this pastor that when he first heard about it, he wanted to go out and make a video, and for something restrained him. But again, that's not what he told me. But he also says that his board said now is the right time. What he doesn't tell Pastor Matt is that he did not tell his board about his relationship with Kim, or Sarah for that matter. So September 13th is the day he found out that the Roys report were considering running an article about this. It is October 25th before he discloses to his board. And when he discloses to his board, he only tells them about Sarah because, again, the issue with Kim is more embarrassing and it's more overtly sexual. And yeah, it will embarrass other people. So the idea that his board has been with him this entire time and saying, now is the right time, now is not the right time. I can only tell you what he said to me and to two other people, one of whom was a board member. We will not talk about the relationship with Kim. And then
his board has changed too, right? Since this all began.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know who's on his board anymore. I can tell you that everyone who was on his board on October 25th, 2024 is no longer on his board. I don't know who the chairman of the board is. I don't know. The only last thing I heard was that Raleigh Washington was his spokesman, and that seemed quite short-lived.
Yeah, maybe. Raleigh, he's the one he pointed me to find out about the failed promise of having a trauma-informed counselor who was going to help create accountability, not be there to counsel Mike Brown like he claims in the video, but to be there to create accountability, which is the claim that they did make. It's on their website, and I've checked the Wayback Machine, and I've seen it. It's there.
Yeah, and we should talk about that briefly. Let me finish this text here, and then maybe we could just talk about that, because I was in those discussions. But let me finish up on the text message to Pastor Matt. That being said, my actions back then were idiotic and inappropriate, responding to the constant daughter-like affection of Sarah. Now,
same garbage, same deflection. She's the active agent, and he's merely reacting. You see the patterns when you start putting all these things together. That is dishonest.
And what does he confess to? I put my arm around her. I touched her rear end several times. I kissed her forehead. I grabbed her hand or held her hand. So all these actions are the only thing that she has done that I know of is that at the end of the day, she would go and give him a hug goodbye.
Well, and people have to understand that I know this is a touchy point for individuals, but the fact is he's the spiritual leader. He's also the older man. He's also married. He's also the male in the relationship. And all of those factors weigh into this to say, you have a certain responsibility, and deflecting things onto her re-victimizes the person who you have already failed and wounded. And so this is always the case. When people don't want to be accountable, they inevitably create more wounds for the people they've already hurt, because somebody has to be in error here. Someone's got to be the bad guy. And so I've got to make them the bad guy. He threw Kim under the bus for years over these issues with people who ever confronted him, and he's throwing Sarah under the bus and continues to. And my heart goes out to him. To be honest, I care about Mike Brown. I do
absolutely
care for him, and but that compassion I feel for him and the tears that he has, that I think are genuine tears. But everybody can cry. Peter can cry after he betrays Jesus. It doesn't make it better. And so those tears, they should be a godly sorrow that leads to repentance. Otherwise, it's the wrong kind of tears.
And what we've seen throughout all these communications is, evading responsibility, deflecting responsibility, her constant affection towards me. And then with Kim, she said something, she wrote something, I saved it in case I was ever accused of anything. And by the way, Ray's testimony, which was powerful and heart-wrenching, would have never come out if Mike had not said that about Kim. If he just said, there was something written down and let's leave it at that. But by making her the culprit, that's why Ray came forward, and his words were powerful.
Which he told me the reason why he said those things about her is to protect her. I kid you not. We spent a while talking about this. And I was like, no, what you did protected you, and it threw her under the bus. That's what happened. But he just kept insisting. He was bound by secrecy and a promise to them that he couldn't say more. And I was like, well, the only thing you said, defended yourself and attacked her. That's all you said. So this is no protection at all. It's the same pattern of behavior.
Right. So regarding the trauma-informed counselor, we were quite upset at the end of this process because the Elder Accountability Board was supposed to have a trauma-informed counselor that never would have allowed them to change sexually abusive misconduct to leadership misconduct. They would have understood the impact that would have on the victim and how wrong that would be. And then Mike in the video, maybe we can play that clip, but Mike in the video says that the trauma-informed counselor was for him because he's the victim. He is going through a trauma, and that's why even as he goes back into ministry,
I will play the listen. I'm going to do this all, and everybody will see right on screen right now. This is the promise they made. You will see on screen that in text, in official statements on their website, the trauma-informed counselor was there to provide accountability and oversight, not to counsel Dr. Brown. That this was done at the request of Ron Cantor and others on the victim side because they wanted that person involved. Later, this person, who knows who they were or what they did, in reality, I'll bet you there's a story there behind the scenes. But Mike Brown then goes on Mercy Culture podcast and makes this false claim, and I'll play that clip now.
That is right.
So on the accountability team was to be a trauma-informed counselor for me. And because of this trauma, that's what it was for. And I did get counseling, and I'm still getting it. And I know that's why even stepping back into ministry, step at a time, because I know there's still wounds to be healed.
So that's a lie. It was not for him to get personal counseling because of his trauma. That's not right.
Yeah, I was in those negotiations. So let's go back now to December. We formed an ad hoc board, and it is interesting. If you watch that whole 3.5 hour video, he talks about Ron and others, and there's a reason he said Ron and others. Well, number one, for time's sake, it's much shorter, but the others would show that there is a group of people that were very close to him. The others were Bob Gladstone, probably the number two at one time, I think the co-director of the school, but everyone in that orbit of Brownsville Revival School of Ministry or Fire School of Ministry knows the name Bob Gladstone, one of the most beloved voices, respected voices. So it was me, Bob Gladstone, Keith Collins, who ended up being the pastor of Fire Church. He was also the president for a time of the Brownsville Revival School of Ministry. And then Mike Labanovic, a local elder with Bob Gladstone. All of us at one time or another extremely close to Mike Brown. So, and all of us, everyone that really was with Mike going back 20 years ago, there's only one leader that I know of. I got to be careful. And that's, Josh Peters. I don't know of any other leaders that are still with him. And the majority are deeply concerned about what's happening right now and the lies that are being told. So the four of us, we formed an ad hoc board because we wanted to make sure that Sarah and the other witnesses had representation before Mike Brown's board. As they were moving ahead, hiring lawyers, hiring investigators, we said, well, hang on, we're not so sure that we're going to cooperate. We need to make sure that this is, and by the way, Mike says it in the video with other shot that I think it was a victim friendly. I can't remember the exact words he used, but no, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't a law firm that was focused on getting the accused off, which is often the case. But in those negotiations, we said you've got to have a board of elders that is going to look at this information. So you got the investigation, but then you need New Testament eldership. This is what I've been arguing about for quite a while. You need genuine, and it would be best if Mike was in a local congregation and it was his elders, but they put a group together of elders. And I said, and you need a trauma-informed counselor because the fact is 6 guys or 5 guys or 4 guys in a room looking over what happened to a 20-year-old woman and a mother, Kim, a older mom. I said, you need females in that room and you need trauma-informed counselors in that room, not just a bunch of, 50, 60-year-old elders. So it was always understood that the trauma-informed counselor was to work with the accountability board to decide on discipline. I never imagined that trauma-informed counselor was there because of Mike's trauma until I heard it from his own lips.
And let me add one more element. On the phone, I asked him about the trauma-informed counselor, or was it text? I think I texted him. Hey, what's up with the trauma-informed counselor? It appears as though they weren't involved. That's how it looks to me as I look at their report afterwards. There's signs in there that they weren't involved. And he says to me, I wasn't part of that because I recused myself, so I'll have to direct you to Rally. He's going to be able to help you. And so now in this interview, he goes, the trauma-informed counselor was for me. Wait a minute. Now you know? Now you know what they're for? Apparently they were for you the whole time. This is completely a lie. This is entirely a lie. All right, this is Mike during editing again. Look, I watched back this part with me and Ron talking here, and I realized how clear of an example it is what he said to me in our phone call compared to what he said in the Mercy Culture podcast. And again, this phone call was only recorded because he wanted it recorded. And so I did as well because he was going to record it. Figured I should have my own copy. But let me read to you now from this conversation where I asked him about this. And please keep in mind, he told Mercy Culture it was always going to be a counselor for him. It was never going to be a counselor to be a trauma-informed counselor, you know, involved in the process of, with oversight type of thing. So I said to Mike, could I ask one thing that has come up that I haven't heard a response to? He said, yeah. I said, it's the idea that the elders were going to include a trauma-informed counselor, and then the claim is that that wasn't the case. Mike, he challenged me at that point. He says, how do you know it wasn't the case? So I said, was it? He said, they had other consultants. They had several people that they consulted, but I was recused, so you'd have to ask the elders. They did tell me that they had other people they consulted with outside of the team that wrote the statement. Worked on that was one thing, but they had other people whose names did not want to be mentioned that they consulted with. You'd have to ask them. I can refer you to Raleigh, Washington on that. I was recused, but I was told that they had other people they consulted with, but I don't know. I can't give you names. That's not my involvement, but I can refer you to the person you can send questions to. So I said it would be, at minimum, wise for them to address this because it was a public commitment they made. Publicly, we committed, we will do this. And as far as what they publicly published, it doesn't look like that happened. Mike Brown says, got it? Well, yeah. I'll get you an email of the person you can reach out to that can speak to that's outside of my domain. Now Mike is saying it was never to be that that person was involved in the investigation or the oversight. It was just going to be that that person was for him personally. Well, then why is it in May, on Cinco de Mayo, why is it that that wasn't the story when he talked to me on the phone?
And I asked the Elder Accountability Board. I mean, as soon as it came out, I was texting, emailing, and saying, because there were a number of problems. And one of them did meet with me and Sarah. Him and his wife met with me and Sarah for an hour. And I have to say, while we disagreed, I appreciated their transparency in talking me through their process. But I asked about the trauma-informed counselor, and they never once said, oh yeah, that was for Dr. Brown. Nobody ever said that. That was a talking point that came out later. It wasn't what we believed before the elder accountability group, and it wasn't what we believed after they gave the report. And again, we asked about it over and over again, never got a response.
So listen, there's a couple things I want us to still do. I think we've gone through our prepared content, but there's a couple things I just want to talk about briefly before we finish this video, and that's to say, what we are seeing, to wrap it in a bow, what we're seeing here is a pattern of dishonesty, manipulation, lies, damage control, throwing people under the bus to save your own reputation, deflection. And then what I see with Michael Brown is I think his circle is getting smaller as far as people on his team. So just, you know what I mean? Yeah. And those groups are becoming increasingly the people who are the usual suspects. It's Mercy Culture. It's that he's now, and I think I know him, at least you know him a lot better than I do, enough to know that he's probably not happy with the people he's forced to keep company with now, but there just isn't other people that have got his back. The people that he wants to have around him, who he feels like are people of integrity, just aren't going to have his back right now.
I think that is an accurate statement. I think there was an expectation that people would rally behind him, believe his narrative. I mean, that was what he requested of us back in October. And now Now you're left with who you got, and it's not always the most people of high integrity.
No, you get Todd White. He'll be on your team. That guy will be on your team, but he's totally corrupt. So these are the people that are going to be on your team because they want the same cover up for themselves, so they can work with you. But I don't think he's as bad as a lot of those guys. I think that this is just, he has been making this problem so much worse because he keeps lying about it and lying about it and lying about it. So I hope, my appeal would be, I don't think he'll watch this video, but my appeal would be to Dr. Brown. There's still absolutely time for grace. If you come out and you share the truth, I will delete this video in a heartbeat, because it will be you being honest, being open. And in fact, if he does it before the video goes live, nobody will ever see this video, and I'll be happier with that resolution. But he'd have to be actually open and honest, not admitting as little as can be known and spin and all this other thing. You'd have to repudiate the mercy culture video that you did. That was horrific. That was abusive. That was disgusting. That has to all be done. And otherwise, it is what it is.
Yeah, and I can tell you at the sometime around the end of April, I was told by one of his board members, this was after the Firefly report came out and after the EAT, Elder Accountability Team report came out, that Mike was broken, that he was meeting with a counselor and that the truth was coming out and he was dealing with it. And I said to this person, I said, as hard as that is for me to believe after what I've been through these 6 months, I said, if that is really true, I was in the States. I will get in my car right now and drive to Charlotte and hug him and love him. And I mean, I would love nothing more than for him to tell the truth. I think what we've done here today is we have shown that he has not been honest. But the appeal is, we love you, Mike. We care for you, Mike. We believe there is hope, but you have to own up to this culture of cover-up. Again, if this was dealt with 23 years ago, not privately, but with other elders, it would have been part of your testimony. But the longer this goes on in pretending that this is a trial, that as opposed to giving account for things that you did in the past, that doesn't help. Maybe it will convince a few people, but I love you enough, Mike. I know that I'll get criticized for this video. I've already lost quite a few friends and acquaintances over this whole issue. But Mike, my prayer for you is that you come into the light fully 100%, and you can be still in the future whom God has called you to be, particularly in the area of Jewish evangelism.
That would be so beautiful. That would be so beautiful. And this idea of, we just want you to disappear forever. That is not what we want. We want real repentance and forgiveness to happen. That's what we really want to see happen. And so this is a sad. This video should not be needed. But one of the things that I want to see, Ron, I'll be honest with you, is I want to see one of these guys that is getting called out, who are part of this circle where they all know each other's dirt, one of them to come out and just spill the beans. Because you know what? I believe that Michael Brown also knows about a bunch of other bad actors that are currently in ministry, and he is not telling anybody who needs to know, which is the followers who are being duped by these guys. And this is the culture of cover-up stuff. So I'm hopefully helping to add my voice to all those who are trying to say, hey, let's confront this, let's deal with this. And today's video is going to hopefully be beneficial in that. I'm sorry for those of you that you love my ministry or you loved my ministry and you don't like what I'm doing. I'm trying to think biblically about how we handle elders who sin and persist in sin, biblically about how we handle leadership who is bringing harms to their people in the name of the Lord, how we handle accountability in the body of Christ. This is thinking biblically about that stuff, and it is very unpleasant, which is why most people won't do it. And I don't enjoy this stuff at all. I can't wait to get back to just teaching verse by verse, which is what I prefer. So, Ron, I don't know. Is there any other final words?
No, I think I don't know how many hours this video is going to be, but I think we've said what needs to be said.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. And I hate to say it, but it's true. There's more coming. I got more videos coming out on more people, and I will absolutely be off people's list as a heresy hunter or a hypercritic or something else by the end of this for sure. It's going to happen. But find where I'm wrong, and then call me that. That's all I would say. So, all right. Well, Ron, thank you. Lord bless you. And I appreciate you speaking to this. Hopefully this is both of our final word on this, unless there's like a positive word we can say later about repentance.
Yeah, let me just reiterate that. If I think I shared it at the beginning of the video, I'm hoping to not talk publicly about this issue ever again. That is my goal. I'm simply responding. I didn't want to do this video, and I told you that I didn't want to do it. I woke up in the morning and I said, I'm going to get a hold of Mike Winger and I'm going to tell him I'm out. I don't want to do it. I don't want to talk about it anymore. And that day, Mike releases, or I saw it that day, a YouTube video where, he's gone through a trial. He's the victim. God honors or revives the contrite of heart. So that's why I did it. And but I appreciate you being willing to host it. And let's pray, Lord, come and do something. Fix. It's a much larger situation, and I think the thing that is being highlighted is that we need genuine New Testament government, not parachurch ministry boards trying to do what they're not called to do. It's the New Testament eldership that deals with sexual sin, not boards, New Testament elders. Final word.
Ask the leaders, who are you submitted to, and can I talk to them? And if you don't have good answers to both of those questions, there is no accountability in that ministry.